Sometimes the hardest moments in life become the doorways to our greatest blessings. Sarah Miller learned this truth the hard way when her own father traded her future to settle his debts. At 16, she stood in a dusty frontier town in 1882, about to marry Jacob Thorne, a widowed mountain man with 2 young daughters. Her father had made it clear she was a burden because of her size. Jacob needed a mother for his girls, and someone to help survive the harsh mountain winters. Sarah had no say in any of it. She was terrified of this stern stranger and the life waiting for her in the high country. But sometimes strength comes from the places we least expect. Could this unwanted girl find her worth in a family that didn't choose her? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Miller had never been a small girl. Even as a child, she'd carried more weight than the other girls in town, and her mother had always told her it didn't matter one bit. "You're strong," her mother would say, brushing Sarah's long brown hair by lamplight. "Strong bones, strong heart, strong mind. That's what matters in this world." Her mother, Elizabeth Miller, had been the kindest woman in their small frontier town of Pine Bend, Montana. She'd run the general store with Sarah's father, Thomas, and she'd had a way of making every customer feel seen and valued. She taught Sarah to read and write, to cook and sew, to keep accounts and manage inventory. She treated Sarah like she was capable of anything, like her size was simply a fact of life, no more significant than the color of her eyes. Then 3 years ago, when Sarah was 13, her mother had taken ill with pneumonia. It happened so fast. One week she was laughing and well, the next she was burning with fever, and by the end of the month, she was gone. Sarah still remembered the last thing her mother had said to her, voice barely a whisper. "Don't let anyone make you feel small, my darling. You're worth more than all the gold in these mountains." Sarah had tried to hold on to those words. She truly had. But after her mother died, everything changed. Her father had always been a decent man when her mother was alive. He'd worked hard at the store, provided for his family, attended church on Sundays. But grief did something terrible to Thomas Miller. He started drinking whiskey in the evenings, just a glass at first, then 2, then half a bottle. The store started suffering. He'd forget to order supplies, miscount change, snap at customers over nothing. Sarah tried to help, tried to keep things running the way her mother had, but she was only 13, then 14, then 15. People in town started going to the trading post 2 miles away instead. With the customers went the money. Bills piled up. Her father borrowed from neighbors, from the bank, from anyone who'd lend. And when he drank, which was most nights now, he'd look at Sarah with something like resentment in his eyes. "Your mother had such high hopes for you," he'd say, words slurring together. "Thought you'd marry well, bring honor to the family. But look at you. What man's going to want a girl who can barely fit through a door?" The words cut deeper each time. Sarah had tried not to let them in, tried to remember her mother's voice instead, but it got harder as the months passed. The people in town didn't help. She'd hear the whispers when she walked to the post office or the church. "Poor thing, big as a house. Shame, really. Pretty face if there wasn't so much of her. Thomas Miller's burden." That's what she is. The only person who was kind to her was Mrs. Callahan, an elderly widow who lived in a small house near the edge of town. Mrs. Callahan had been her mother's closest friend, and she'd taken Sarah under her wing after Elizabeth died. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Sarah would walk to Mrs. Callahan's house, and the old woman would teach her things her mother hadn't had time to pass on. Advanced cooking, intricate sewing, how to make medicines from herbs, how to preserve food for winter. Mrs. Callahan never mentioned Sarah's size except to say, "You've got good, strong hands, child. Hands that can do real work." Those afternoons at Mrs. Callahan's house were the only times Sarah felt like herself anymore. The only times she felt seen as something other than a problem to be solved. But even Mrs. Callahan couldn't protect her from what was coming. Sarah had heard of Jacob Thorne, though she'd never spoken to him. Everyone in Pine Bend knew of him. He lived high up in the mountains, miles from town, in a cabin he'd built himself. He came down maybe once a month for supplies, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and a beard, wearing buckskin and wool. He was a mountain man through and through, trapped beaver and mink, hunted elk and deer, knew the high country like most men knew their own parlors. He'd been married to Anna Thorne, a sweet-faced woman from a town 40 miles east. She'd come to Pine Bend as a schoolteacher, met Jacob, and within 6 months they were married. People said she'd civilized him some, that he'd smile more when she was around. They had 2 daughters, Emma and Lucy, and for a while it seemed like Jacob Thorne had found a kind of peace. Then 2 years ago, Anna had gotten pregnant again. The birth went wrong. The baby, a son, was stillborn, and Anna bled out before anyone could help. Jacob had carried her body down the mountain himself, buried her in the church cemetery, and then disappeared back to his cabin with his 2 little girls. He'd barely spoken a word to anyone since. When he came to town now, he was grim and silent. He'd buy his supplies, load his pack mule, and leave without socializing. People said he was drowning in grief, that those 2 little girls were growing up wild, without a mother, that Jacob didn't know how to care for them properly. Some of the church ladies had offered to help, but Jacob had refused every offer. He was managing, he'd said. They were fine, but clearly they weren't fine, because 6 weeks ago Jacob Thorne had come to Sarah's father with a proposition. Sarah hadn't been there for the conversation. She'd been in the back room of the store, taking inventory of the dwindling supplies, when she'd heard men's voices in the front. Her father's voice, slurred with afternoon drinking, and another voice, deep and measured. She'd crept closer to listen. "I need help," Jacob had said. "The girls need a woman's hand. I can't do it alone anymore. What are you proposing?" Her father had asked. "Marriage," Jacob had said simply. "I'll pay off your debts. All of them, the bank, the suppliers, everyone you owe. In exchange, I get a wife. Someone to care for my daughters, help run the household. Someone who won't run off at the first hard winter." There'd been a long pause. Sarah had pressed her ear to the door, heart pounding. "You're talking about Sarah," her father had said finally. "I am. She's only 16. Old enough to marry." "You know that." Another pause. Sarah had held her breath. "She's not exactly what most men want," her father had said, and Sarah had felt the familiar shame burn through her chest. "She's big, Jacob, bigger than most women. I won't lie to you about that. I'm not looking for pretty," Jacob had replied. "I'm looking for capable, for someone who can work hard and won't complain about mountain life. Your wife ran a good store. If your daughter learned from her, she'll do. What if Sarah doesn't want this?" Jacob's response had been blunt. "Does she have other prospects?" The silence that followed had told Sarah everything she needed to know. Her father had no answer because they both knew the truth. No man in Pine Bend was going to court Sarah Miller. No man anywhere would, probably. She was too big, too plain, too poor now that the store was failing. This might be her only chance at marriage, at getting out of her father's house before the bank took even that. "I'll talk to her father had said finally. "I need an answer within the week," Jacob had said. "Winter's coming. I need this settled." That night her father had sat Sarah down at the kitchen table. He'd been drinking, but not as much as usual. He'd looked at her with something like regret in his eyes, but also determination. "Sarah," he'd said, "Jacob Thorne has made us an offer." He'd explained the arrangement. Marriage in exchange for debt forgiveness. A home in the mountains, 2 stepdaughters to raise, a hard life but an honest one. Security for her, freedom from debt for him. "You don't have to say yes," her father had said, though they both knew that was a lie. "But I think you should consider it carefully. This might be your best chance at a life of your own." Sarah had sat there, numb, staring at her hands. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." But right now she felt smaller than she ever had. Small and trapped and worthless. "How long do I have to decide?" She'd asked quietly. "A week." She'd spent that week in a fog. She'd gone through the motions of daily life, helping at the store, visiting Mrs. Callahan, lying awake at night staring at the ceiling. She turned the decision over and over in her mind. Stay with her father and watch him drink himself to death while the store collapsed around them. or go with a stranger to a mountain cabin and raise children who weren't hers. Neither option felt like a choice. Both felt like different versions of imprisonment, but at least with Jacob Thorne, she'd have a purpose. She'd have children to care for, a home to keep. It wouldn't be love. She wasn't naive enough to expect that, but it would be something. It would be better than watching her father resent her existence every single day. On the 7th day, she'd told her father yes. 2 weeks later, on a cold November morning, Sarah had stood in the small church in Pine Bend, wearing her mother's best dress, letting out as far as it would go. Jacob Thorne had stood beside her in clean clothes, his face unreadable. The preacher had spoken the words quickly, efficiently, like he was getting through an unpleasant task. There were no guests except her father, Mrs. Callahan, and the store owner who'd witnessed the debt agreement. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Jacob had simply nodded at Sarah. No kiss. No tender moment. Just a nod of acknowledgement, like she was a business transaction now completed. Afterward, in front of the church, her father had hugged her briefly. "You'll be fine," he'd said, though he wouldn't meet her eyes. "You're strong, like your mother." Mrs. Callahan had hugged her longer, pressing something into Sarah's hand. When Sarah had looked down, she'd seen her mother's locket, the tarnished silver one Elizabeth had always worn. Inside was a tiny photograph of Sarah as a baby, held in her mother's arms. "Your father was going to sell it," Mrs. Callahan had whispered. "I bought it from him last week. It belongs to you, child. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget you're loved." Sarah had clutched the locket, tears burning in her eyes. She'd wanted to say something, to thank Mrs. Callahan, to tell her how much these last 3 years of kindness had meant. But her throat had been too tight, the words wouldn't come. Jacob had loaded Sarah's few belongings onto a pack mule. 2 dresses, a coat, some personal items, her mother's recipe book. Everything she owned in the world fit into 2 small bags. Then he'd helped her onto a horse, mounted his own, and they'd headed out of town without a word. The ride up the mountain had taken 4 hours. Jacob hadn't spoken except to warn her about a steep section of trail or to tell her to watch for low branches. Sarah had tried to memorize the path, the landmarks, in case she ever needed to find her way back down. But as they climbed higher and higher, the trail became less defined, the forest thicker. By the time they reached the cabin, Sarah had no idea how she'd ever find her way back to Pine Bend on her own. The sun had been setting when they arrived, casting long shadows across the small clearing where Jacob's cabin stood. It was a solid structure, bigger than Sarah had expected, made of thick logs chinked with mud and moss. There was a small barn for animals, a woodshed, a root cellar built into the hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant someone was inside. Jacob had dismounted and come to help Sarah down from her horse. His hands had been strong and impersonal, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, setting her on the ground without comment about her size. That small mercy had been the only kindness of the day. "Girls are inside," he'd said, his first full sentence in hours. "They know you're coming." "They're not happy about it." He'd said it matter-of-factly, without apology or reassurance. "Just stating a fact." Sarah had nodded, her stomach churning with anxiety. Jacob had pushed open the cabin door, and warm air had rushed out, carrying the smell of wood smoke and something cooking. Sarah had stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. And there they were, 2 little girls, standing side by side near the fireplace, staring at her with identical expressions of suspicion and hostility. Emma, the older one at 7 years old, had her mother's features, delicate bone structure, light brown hair in 2 braids, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She stood protectively in front of her younger sister, one hand on the little one's shoulder, her chin lifted in defiance. Lucy, just 4 years old, peeked out from behind Emma, clutching a torn ragdoll to her chest. She had her father's dark hair and darker eyes, round cheeks and a thumb in her mouth despite being too old for it. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the fire crackling in the hearth and the wind outside the cabin walls. Then Emma spoke, her voice clear and cold. "You're not our mama." Sarah's heart had sunk. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, But hearing the rejection so plainly, seeing it in these children's faces, made it real in a way nothing else had. "No," Sarah had agreed quietly. "I'm not your mama. My name is Sarah." "We don't need you," Emma had continued, her hand tightening on Lucy's shoulder. "We were doing fine before you came." Jacob had moved past Sarah, setting down the bags. "Emma, that's enough. Sarah's here now. She's my wife, which makes her your stepmother. You'll treat her with respect." "I won't," Emma had said, and Sarah had seen tears gathering in the girl's eyes despite the brave words. "You can't make me." Jacob had looked like he wanted to say something harsh, but he'd stopped himself. Instead, he'd knelt down to Emma's level. "I know you miss your mama," he'd said, his voice gentler than Sarah had heard it yet. "I miss her too. But we need help, Emma. You and Lucy need a woman's care. Sarah's here to help us." "We don't want help," Emma had whispered, but the fight was draining from her voice. She'd looked exhausted, this little girl trying so hard to be strong. "We want Mama back." "I know, sweetheart," Jacob had said. "I know." He'd pulled Emma into a brief hug, and Lucy had joined in, wrapping her small arms around her father's neck. Sarah had stood there, an intruder in this moment of grief, understanding with painful clarity that she was entering a family that hadn't made room for her, that might never make room for her. When Jacob had stood, he turned to Sarah with those same unreadable eyes. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," he'd said. "Then we'll have supper." That had been 6 hours ago. Now Sarah lay in the small room off the kitchen that Jacob had designated as hers, staring at the rough wooden ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a small table and a hook on the wall for her clothes. It had clearly been used for storage before today. There were still boxes stacked in one corner that Jacob hadn't had time to move. Supper had been a silent, miserable affair. The girls had refused to eat the stew Sarah had tried to warm up, pushing their bowls away and glaring at her. Jacob had eaten without comment, then taken the girls to their room to put them to bed. Sarah had cleaned up alone, exploring the kitchen, trying to learn where things were kept, feeling like a thief in someone else's home. Now, in the darkness, Sarah clutched her mother's locket in one hand, feeling the cool metal against her palm. She thought about her mother's words. "Don't let anyone make you feel small," but she did feel small. She felt invisible and unwanted and utterly alone, despite being in a house with 3 other people. She wondered if this was what her life would be now, existing at the edges of a family that didn't want her, performing duties no one would thank her for, waiting for something to change that might never change at all. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. Sarah let them fall silently, knowing that if she made any sound, if anyone heard her crying, it would only make everything worse. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she'd be stronger. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to survive this. But tonight she let herself grieve for the life she'd never have, the love she'd never feel, the home she'd lost when her mother died. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and the mountain night pressed close around the cabin. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that when dawn came, the real work of her new life would begin. Sarah woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the cabin. For a moment she forgot where she was, then reality crashed back. The mountain, the marriage, the children who hated her. She sat up in the narrow bed, her body stiff from the unfamiliar mattress, and listened. Jacob's boots on the wooden floor, the scrape of the stove door opening, the clatter of wood being added to the fire. He was up, starting his day, and Sarah realized with a jolt that she should be up too. She was supposed to be the one managing the household now. She dressed quickly, in the dim light filtering through the small window, pulling on the same dress from yesterday. Her other dress was still packed, and she hadn't wanted to unpack last night, hadn't wanted to make it feel permanent. She splashed cold water on her face from the basin Jacob had left in her room, pinned up her hair as best she could without a proper mirror, and stepped out into the main room of the cabin. Jacob stood by the stove, already dressed for the day in work clothes, his coat on. He glanced at her, nodded once. "Coffee's on? Girls will be up soon. There's oatmeal in the cupboard, dried apples in the barrel by the door. They like it sweetened with honey if we have it. Before Sarah could respond, he was heading for the door. "I'll be checking the trap lines today. Won't be back until evening. There's wood that needs splitting. Axe is in the shed. Root cellar needs organizing. Plenty to keep you busy." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving Sarah alone in the dim cabin with two children who despised her sleeping in the next room. She stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. Then she took a breath and got to work. If nothing else, she knew how to work. Her mother had taught her that. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it helped wake her up. She found the oatmeal where Jacob said it would be, located a pot, got the fire built up properly. She was stirring the pot when she heard small footsteps behind her. Lucy stood in the doorway of the girl's room, still in her nightgown, her dark hair tangled around her face. She clutched her torn rag doll to her chest. The doll was clearly well loved, its fabric body stained and worn, one arm partially detached, button eyes hanging by threads. The little girl stared at Sarah with enormous dark eyes, thumb creeping toward her mouth. "Good morning," Sarah said gently, keeping her voice soft. "Are you hungry?" Lucy didn't answer, just continued to stare. Then Emma appeared behind her, already dressed, her face set in that same expression of hostility from last night. "Lucy, come here," Emma said, taking her sister's hand. "Don't talk to her." "I'm making breakfast," Sarah said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Oatmeal with apples and honey, like your papa said you enjoy." "We don't want your food," Emma said coldly. She pulled Lucy toward the table, but positioned them at the far end, as far from Sarah as possible. Sarah finished preparing the oatmeal, added the dried apples she'd found, drizzled honey over 3 bowls. She set 2 bowls in front of the girls and took her own to the opposite end of the table. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. Emma pushed her bowl away without tasting it. "I'm not hungry." "You need to eat," Sarah said quietly. "It's going to be a long day." "You can't tell me what to do," Emma shot back. "You're not my mother." "No," Sarah agreed, "I'm not. But I am responsible for making sure you're fed and cared for. Your father asked me to do that. Papa only married you because he had to," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly. "Because he can't take care of us by himself. But we were fine before. We don't need you." Sarah looked at this little girl, 7 years old and trying so hard to be strong, and saw the grief underneath the anger. Saw the fear of losing her mother's memory to this stranger. Saw a child who'd lost too much too young. "I know you don't need me," Sarah said gently. "I know you miss your mama. I miss mine too. She died 3 years ago." Emma's expression flickered, just for a moment, but then the walls came back up. "That's different." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But I understand what it's like to lose the person who loved you most in the world." Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't understand anything. Come on, Lucy." She grabbed her sister's hand and pulled her away from the table. Lucy looked back at her untouched bowl of oatmeal, then at Sarah, confusion clear on her small face. But she let Emma lead her back to their room, the door shutting firmly behind them. Sarah sat alone at the table, looking at the 3 bowls of oatmeal, only one of them touched. This was going to be harder than she'd imagined, and she'd already imagined it being nearly impossible. The morning passed in awkward tension. Sarah tried to familiarize herself with the cabin, learning where things were kept, what supplies they had, what needed to be done. The cabin was larger than it had seemed last night. There was the main room, with the kitchen area and a table, the fireplace taking up most of one wall. A door led to Jacob's room, another to the girl's room, and her small room off the kitchen. Everything was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no decorative touches anywhere. It was clear this was a house where people survived, not a home where people lived. The girls emerged from their room mid-morning, but refused to acknowledge Sarah. They played quietly in the corner, Emma reading from a worn book to Lucy, both of them shooting occasional glares in Sarah's direction. When Sarah tried to ask if they needed anything, Emma simply turned her back. By afternoon, Sarah had organized what she could, swept the floors, prepared a stew for dinner. She stepped outside to split wood, as Jacob had mentioned, and was immediately struck by the beauty of their surroundings. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, the mountains rising dramatically in every direction. The air was crisp and cold, the sky a brilliant blue. It was isolated, certainly, but there was something peaceful about it too. Something that might have been appealing under different circumstances. She found the axe in the shed and brought several logs to the chopping block. The physical work felt good, familiar. Her mother had taught her that there was dignity in hard work, that using your body to accomplish something real was its own reward. She fell into a rhythm, splitting log after log, feeling her muscles warm despite the cold air. She didn't hear Emma come outside until the girl spoke. "You're doing it wrong." Sarah paused, axe raised. Emma stood a few feet away, arms crossed, that same critical expression on her face. "My papa taught me how to split wood properly," Emma continued. "You're not positioning the axe right. You'll hurt yourself that way." Sarah lowered the axe slowly. "Would you like to show me?" Emma hesitated, clearly torn between her desire to maintain her hostility and her 7-year-old need to demonstrate knowledge. Finally, she stepped forward. "You have to look for the cracks in the wood first. See, this one has a crack running through it. That's where you aim, and you have to lift the axe higher, bring it down harder." Sarah watched as Emma demonstrated, her small arms struggling with the weight of the axe, but her technique clearly practiced. The log split cleanly. "That's very good," Sarah said honestly. "Your papa taught you well." Emma's face flushed with pride before she remembered she was supposed to be angry. She thrust the axe back at Sarah. "Just do it like that. Papa doesn't need you getting hurt and being useless." Before Sarah could respond, Emma had turned and run back inside. But something had shifted just slightly. Emma had spoken to her, had taught her something. It was a small crack in the wall, but it was something. The afternoon wore on. Sarah continued working, splitting wood, hauling water from the nearby stream, trying to make herself useful. She found herself thinking about Jacob, wondering what his days were like out there, checking trap lines, wondering if he thought about his daughters and his dead wife, wondering if he regretted bringing her here. When the sun began to set, Sarah went back inside to tend to the stew. The girls were sitting by the fire now, Lucy playing with her doll, while Emma worked on some kind of sewing project, mending a tear in one of her dresses, Sarah realized. "Dinner will be ready soon," Sarah said. "Would one of you like to set the table?" Silence. Then Lucy started to stand, but Emma grabbed her arm. "No, let her do everything herself if she wants to be in charge." Sarah didn't argue. She set the table herself, ladled stew into bowls, sliced bread she'd found in the cupboard. When she called them to eat, Emma again pushed her bowl away. But this time Lucy hesitated. "Emma, I'm hungry," the little girl whispered. "We're not eating her food," Emma said firmly. "But Papa said—" "I don't care what Papa said." Lucy's lower lip trembled. She looked at the stew, then at her sister, then at Sarah. Her little stomach growled audibly. Sarah made a decision. She stood up, took her bowl to the other end of the cabin, and sat with her back to the girls. "I'm going to eat over here," she said calmly. "If anyone else wants to eat, the food is on the table. If not, I'll put it away for tomorrow." She began eating, not looking at them, giving them space to make their own choice. She heard whispers, heard Lucy's small, plaintive voice, heard Emma's sharp response. Then she heard the scrape of a chair, the clink of a spoon against a bowl. When Sarah glanced back, Lucy was eating, taking small, hesitant bites. Emma sat rigid beside her, arms crossed, not eating but no longer stopping her sister. It was progress, small but real. They were cleaning up, Sarah washing dishes, while the girls retreated back to their corner when Jacob returned. He stamped his boots at the door, came inside bringing cold air and the smell of pine and wood smoke. He looked tired, his face weathered and drawn, but he nodded at Sarah. "Smells good," he said, surprising her. "There's stew left if you're hungry." He served himself, sat at the table, ate without speaking. The girls had perked up when he arrived, both of them rushing to him. Lucy climbing into his lap, while Emma stood close, telling him about their day in rushed, excited whispers. Sarah noticed they left out any mention of her, as if she hadn't been there at all. When he finished eating, Jacob pulled Emma onto his other knee. both girls now cradled in his arms. "Did you behave for Sarah today?" Silence. Then Emma, quietly, "We didn't need her help." Jacob sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Emma, we talked about this. I know, but Papa, no. Sarah is part of this family now. She's here to help all of us. That means you treat her with respect, same as you'd treat me. Understood?" Emma's face crumpled, and suddenly she was crying, really crying. Not the angry tears from before, but deep, wrenching sobs. "But I don't want her here." "I want Mama. I want Mama back." Lucy started crying too, clinging to her father, and Jacob held them both, his own face stricken with pain. "I know, sweetheart, I know. I want her back too." Sarah stood frozen by the wash basin, watching this family grieve, understanding with painful clarity that her presence here wasn't just an inconvenience to these children. It was a constant reminder of their loss. Every time they looked at her, they saw the proof that their mother was really, truly gone, that someone else was here trying to take her place. Jacob looked up, met Sarah's eyes across the room. She saw the apology there, the regret, but also the exhaustion. He was doing his best, but his best was barely keeping them all afloat. "Come on, girls," he said gently. "Time for bed." He carried them both to their room, and Sarah could hear him talking to them quietly, his voice a low rumble through the walls. When he emerged, he looked even more tired than before. "They'll come around," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Just give them time." "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule." Jacob studied her for a moment, something like surprise in his eyes. "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." He moved to the door, preparing to go to his own room, then paused. "You did fine today. The cabin looks better. Dinner was good. Thank you." The words were stiff, formal, but they were genuine. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, just slightly. "Good night," she said. "Night," he replied. And then he was gone, door closing behind him. Sarah finished cleaning up, banked the fire for the night, and retreated to her small room. She sat on the narrow bed, pulled out her mother's locket, and opened it to look at the tiny photograph inside. Her mother's face smiled up at her, forever young, forever loving. "I don't know if I can do this," Sarah whispered to the photograph. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." But she knew her mother would have said she was, would have told her that strength wasn't about not being afraid or hurt. It was about getting up the next morning and trying again anyway. So when Sarah finally lay down to sleep, she made herself a promise. Tomorrow she would try again, and the day after that, and the day after that. She would keep trying until either this became home or until she found a way to survive it. There wasn't any other choice. Outside, the mountain night settled in, and somewhere in the darkness a wolf howled. Inside the cabin, 4 people slept in separate rooms, each one alone with their own grief, their own fears, their own uncertain hopes for whatever came next. The first month passed in a blur of hard work and small battles. Sarah fell into a routine born of necessity: wake before dawn, build up the fire, prepare breakfast, clean the cabin, mend clothes, cook meals, haul water, split wood. The work never ended, but at least it gave her purpose, gave her something to focus on besides the loneliness that threatened to swallow her whole. The girls remained hostile, though Lucy's resistance was weakening. The 4-year-old would sometimes forget to be angry, would start to approach Sarah with a question or a request, then remember at the last moment and run back to Emma. It broke Sarah's heart every time, but she understood. Lucy was caught between her sister's fierce loyalty to their mother's memory and her natural need for maternal care. Emma was harder. The 7-year-old had built walls so high that Sarah didn't know how to reach her. Every overture Sarah made was rebuffed. Every kindness was met with suspicion. Emma watched Sarah constantly, looking for mistakes, for proof that this stranger wasn't worthy of being in their home. And Jacob was barely there. He left before sunrise most days and returned after dark. When he was home, he was quiet, present physically but absent in every other way. He'd eat whatever Sarah prepared without comment, play with his daughters for a few minutes, then retreat to his room. Sarah sometimes wondered if he even remembered she existed when he was out in the forest, Or if she was just another piece of furniture he walked past on his way to somewhere else. But there were small moments of progress, tiny cracks in the walls they'd all built. One morning, Sarah woke to find Lucy standing in her doorway clutching her torn rag doll. The little girl said nothing, just stood there in her nightgown, watching. Sarah sat up slowly, careful not to startle her. "Good morning, Lucy," she said softly. "Did you need something?" Lucy held up the doll. One of its arms had come completely detached now, hanging by a single thread. The little girl's eyes were filled with tears. "Can you fix her?" Lucy whispered. "Emma tried, but she doesn't know how. Mama made her for me before—" She didn't finish the sentence. Sarah's heart squeezed. This was the first time Lucy had spoken directly to her, the first time she'd asked for help. "I can try," Sarah said gently. "Would you like to bring her here?" Lucy nodded and climbed up onto the bed, settling next to Sarah with complete trust that made Sarah's throat tight. She examined the doll carefully. The fabric was worn thin in places, the stuffing was coming out, but she could repair it. Her mother had taught her detailed needlework, and Mrs. Callahan had reinforced those skills. "I'll need to get my sewing basket," Sarah said. "Will you wait here?" Lucy nodded again, clutching the doll's body while Sarah retrieved her supplies from the kitchen. When she returned, she showed Lucy each step, choosing the right thread, reinforcing the weak seams, carefully reattaching the arm with small, tight stitches. Lucy watched with fascination, asking quiet questions, her small face serious with concentration. They were so focused on the work that neither of them heard Emma until she spoke from the doorway. "Lucy, what are you doing?" Lucy jumped, guilt flashing across her face. "She's fixing my doll." "Emma, look, she's making it better." Emma's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. She looked at her sister, at Sarah, at the doll being carefully mended. "You shouldn't bother her," Emma said finally, but there was less anger in her voice than usual. More resignation. "It's no bother," Sarah said quietly, finishing the last stitch. She handed the doll back to Lucy. "There, good as new." Lucy hugged the doll, then impulsively hugged Sarah. It lasted only a second before the little girl seemed to realize what she'd done and ran to Emma, but it was enough. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. Emma took Lucy's hand and led her out, but at the doorway she paused. "Thank you," she said so quietly Sarah almost didn't hear it. Then she was gone. It was a small thing, that moment of mending, but it felt like a beginning. A few days later, Sarah made a discovery that both encouraged and discouraged her. She'd been looking for a particular pot in the kitchen when she found a leather-bound book tucked into the back of a cupboard. When she pulled it out, she saw the name written on the inside cover in flowing script, Anna Thorne. It was Anna's recipe book. Sarah should have put it back immediately. This was private, a remnant of the woman who'd lived here before, the woman whose ghost still inhabited every corner of this cabin. But curiosity won out. She opened the book carefully. The pages were filled with recipes written in beautiful handwriting, instructions for bread, stews, preserves, cakes. There were notes in the margins, little observations. "Jacob loves this one," or "Emma won't eat if there are onions," or "remember to double the salt." It was intimate, this glimpse into Anna's life, into her relationship with her family. Sarah found herself comparing her own cooking to Anna's recipes. Some things she did differently, some better, some not as well. She could see that Anna had been a good cook, methodical and careful. But there were also recipes that seemed overly complicated, or ingredients Sarah knew would be hard to get this far up the mountain. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't hear Jacob come in for his midday meal until he spoke. "That was my wife's." Sarah jumped, nearly dropping the book. Jacob stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. She felt like she'd been caught doing something shameful. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was looking for a pot and I found it. I shouldn't have—" "It's fine," Jacob said, though his voice was stiff. "You live here now. You'll be doing the cooking. Makes sense you'd want to see what she made." He moved past her to wash his hands at the basin. Sarah stood there awkwardly, still holding the book, not sure if she should put it away or keep it out. "She was a good cook," Jacob said without looking at her. "Better at baking than stews." "Had a light hand with pastries?" I can see that from her notes, Sarah said carefully. She was very organized. She was organized about everything, Jacob said, and there was something painful in his voice. Kept this whole place running smooth as clockwork. The girls never wanted for anything when she was alive. Sarah heard what he didn't say, unlike now. Unlike with you, I'm not trying to replace her, Sarah said quietly. I know I can't. Jacob finally looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. I know that, he said. Nobody's asking you to, but Sarah wasn't sure that was true. She felt the weight of comparison every day, felt Anna's presence in every corner of this cabin, in every critical look from Emma, in every moment of awkward silence. I thought I might try some of her recipes, Sarah said, holding up the book. If that's all right. Maybe it would help the girls, having familiar food. Jacob considered this, then nodded slowly. That's thoughtful of you. He paused, then added, but don't feel like you have to cook exactly like she did. You're allowed to do things your own way. It was the kindest thing he'd said to her since she'd arrived. Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest, fragile but real. That evening she made one of Anna's recipes, a chicken stew with dumplings. She followed the instructions carefully, adding her own touches where she thought they'd improve it. When she served it, Emma looked at the bowl suspiciously. This looks like Mama's stew, she said. I found her recipe book, Sarah said honestly. I thought you might like to have some of the foods you remember. Emma stared at the stew for a long moment. Then she picked up her spoon and took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. It's good, she said, surprised. It tastes like Mama's, but different. Better, maybe. Sarah watched as Emma actually ate for the first time since she'd arrived. Lucy followed her sister's lead, taking careful bites, then eating more eagerly when she found it good. Even Jacob seemed to notice, glancing between his daughters and Sarah with something like approval. After dinner, Emma approached Sarah while she was washing dishes. The girl stood there for a moment, clearly working up her courage for something. Could you teach me? Emma asked finally. How to cook like that? Mama tried to teach me some things, but I was too young. I don't remember much. Sarah's hands stilled in the dishwater. This was the first time Emma had asked her for anything. The first time she'd acknowledged that Sarah might have something valuable to offer. I'd be happy to, Sarah said, keeping her voice calm despite the emotions surging through her. We could start tomorrow if you'd like. I'm planning to make bread. Emma nodded, a small smile flickering across her face before she controlled it. Okay, tomorrow then. As the days passed, a tentative peace began to settle over the cabin. Emma still had her moments of hostility, still sometimes refused to cooperate or said cutting things about Sarah not being her real mother. But increasingly, there were other moments too. Moments when Emma would work beside Sarah in the kitchen, when she'd ask questions about cooking or sewing, when she'd forget to be angry for whole minutes at a time. Lucy was easier. The 4-year-old was naturally affectionate and grew less guarded every day. She started sitting next to Sarah at meals, started bringing her little treasures she'd found, a pretty stone, a bird feather, a handful of wildflowers that had somehow survived the cold. Sarah received each gift with genuine delight, treasuring these signs that Lucy was beginning to accept her. Jacob remained distant, but Sarah noticed small changes in him too. He started lingering at breakfast, drinking his coffee more slowly, sometimes asking Sarah about her plans for the day. He brought home extra meat from his hunts, enough that Sarah could smoke and preserve it properly. Once he fixed the loose handle on one of the kitchen pots without being asked, noticing it was causing Sarah trouble. They were tiny gestures, these small acts of consideration. But they meant something. They meant he saw her, that she was more than just a necessary burden to him. One evening, about 5 weeks after Sarah's arrival, they were all sitting together after dinner. Lucy was curled up in Sarah's lap, something that had become routine, while Sarah read aloud from one of the few books in the cabin. Emma sat close by, listening intently, and Jacob was in his chair by the fire, supposedly mending a trap, but mostly just watching them all. Sarah was reading from a collection of folk tales, doing different voices for the characters, when she noticed Lucy's breathing had gone deep and steady. The little girl, had fallen asleep, her head heavy against Sarah's shoulder, her thumb in her mouth. Sarah looked up and found Jacob watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something soft in his eyes, something almost tender. "She's out," Sarah whispered, not wanting to wake Lucy. Jacob stood, crossed the room, and carefully lifted Lucy from Sarah's lap. The little girl stirred but didn't wake, snuggling into her father's chest. "I'll put her to bed," he said quietly. After he'd carried Lucy away, Emma yawned and stretched. "I'm tired too," she announced. "Go on then," Sarah said. "I'll clean up here." Emma started toward her room, then turned back. She looked at Sarah with those sharp blue eyes, considering something. Then she said, "You're not as bad as I thought you'd be." Before Sarah could respond, Emma had disappeared into her room. But Sarah sat there smiling, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. It wasn't acceptance, not quite, but it was acknowledgement. It was a step in the right direction. When Jacob came back out, he found Sarah still sitting there, still smiling. He raised an eyebrow in question. Emma said, "I'm not as bad as she thought I'd be," Sarah explained. A smile tugged at the corner of Jacob's mouth, the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. High praise from Emma. She doesn't give compliments easily. "I noticed," Sarah said, and found herself smiling back at him. They stood there for a moment, something shifting in the air between them. Jacob cleared his throat, looked away. I have to check my gear for tomorrow." "Of course," Sarah said quickly, but as he turned to go, he paused. "You're doing well, Sarah, with the girls, with everything. I know this isn't easy, but you're good at it." Before Sarah could find words to respond, he'd gone to his room, leaving her alone with those words echoing in her mind. "You're good at it." It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship, really. But it was recognition. It was worth. That night, Sarah wrote in the journal she'd been keeping, documenting her days in careful script. She wrote about the small victories, Lucy's hugs, Emma's grudging approval, Jacob's rare smile. She wrote about the challenges too, the moments of doubt, the crushing loneliness that still came in waves. But mostly, she wrote about hope. Fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, she was finding her place here. That maybe this cabin in the mountains could become something more than a prison. That maybe these 3 wounded people could learn to make room for her in their lives. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real snow of winter. Sarah watched the flakes drift past her small window, settling on the pine branches, covering the world in white. Winter was coming, the season when they'd all be trapped together in this small space, unable to escape even if they wanted to. But for the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah didn't feel afraid of that. She felt ready to face the winter, ready to keep working, ready to keep trying. She touched her mother's locket, hanging around her neck, and whispered, "I'm doing it, Mama, I'm surviving." And more than that, she was beginning to think she might even be able to thrive. The snow that had started as gentle flakes turned into a full winter storm over the next few days, burying the cabin in white and sealing them all inside together. Sarah had worried this forced proximity would make things worse, would heighten tensions and conflicts. Instead, something unexpected happened. They began to feel like a family. Maybe it was the necessity of cooperation when the world outside became hostile. Maybe it was the coziness of being warm and safe while the wind howled. Or maybe it was simply that they'd all grown tired of fighting and had started to let their guards down, piece by careful piece. Sarah noticed changes in Jacob first. He couldn't leave to check his trap lines in weather like this, which meant he was home all day for the first time since she'd arrived. At first, he seemed restless, prowling the cabin like a caged animal, finding small tasks to occupy himself, sharpening tools, mending equipment, organizing supplies. But on the 3rd day of being snowbound, Sarah found him doing something she hadn't expected. He sat by the fire with a piece of wood and a small knife, carving with focused concentration. Lucy was curled up next to him, watching with fascination while Emma swept the floor nearby, sneaking glances at her father's work. "What are you making, Papa?" Lucy asked. "A rabbit," Jacob said, his voice gentler than Sarah had heard it before. See here, these will be the ears. Sarah moved closer, curious despite herself. In Jacob's large, calloused hands, the piece of wood was transforming into something delicate and beautiful. He worked with surprising precision, his knife moving in small, controlled strokes. Already the shape of a rabbit was emerging, sitting up, ears alert, nose lifted as if sniffing the air. "That's beautiful," Sarah said without thinking. Jacob glanced up, and for a moment she saw something almost shy in his expression. "It's just whittling. Something to pass the time." "It's more than that," Sarah insisted. She could see the care in every cut, the artistry in the way he was shaping the wood. "It's real craftsmanship." Jacob's face colored slightly, but he looked pleased. He returned his attention to the rabbit, and Sarah noticed a small collection of other carved animals on the mantel. A deer, a fox, a bird. She'd seen them before, but had assumed they were store-bought. Now she realized Jacob had made them all. "Do you make these for the girls?" she asked. "Sometimes," Jacob admitted. "Anna used to say I should sell them in town, but I never saw the point. They're just something I do. Helps me think." "Mama loved the ones you made her," Emma said, pausing in her sweeping. "She kept them all on her dresser. Said they were proof you had a gentle heart under all that gruffness." Jacob's hands stilled for a moment, emotion flickering across his face. Then he cleared his throat and went back to carving. "Your mama saw things in people that weren't always there." "They were there," Emma said with the certainty of a child. She was right about everything. Sarah watched this exchange, feeling like an intruder in their shared memory. But then Lucy turned to her with bright eyes. "Papa, will you make one for Sarah?" the little girl asked. The question hung in the air. Jacob looked at Lucy, then at Sarah, considering. "What would you like?" he asked finally. Sarah was touched by the offer but didn't want to presume. "You don't have to." "I know," Jacob said. "But if I was going to, what would you want?" Sarah thought about it. What animal represented her? What would she want to look at and remember this time by? "A bear," she said finally. "My mother always said I was strong like a bear." Something shifted in Jacob's expression. Understanding, maybe, or respect. "A bear, then. Might take a few days." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said, and they both smiled slightly at that truth. None of them were going anywhere, not with snow piled 4 feet high outside. As the days passed, Sarah watched Jacob work on the bear in the evenings after dinner. He was meticulous about it, clearly putting more effort into this carving than into the simple toys he made for the girls. The bear began to take shape, strong and solid, standing on its hind legs, protective rather than threatening. During these evening sessions, something else began to happen. They started talking. It started with small things. Emma asked Sarah about her life before the mountain, and Sarah found herself sharing memories of her mother, of running the store, of the books she'd loved to read. Jacob listened quietly, occasionally asking a question, seeming genuinely interested in her answers. Then one evening, Jacob began to talk about his own past, about growing up in a farming family back east, the youngest of 6 sons, about his father's expectations that he'd take over the farm, about the suffocating feeling of having his whole life planned out before he'd lived any of it. "I wanted to be a teacher," Jacob said, and Sarah could hear the old longing in his voice. "Loved books, loved learning, thought maybe I could help other kids discover that same love." He paused, his knife moving slowly over the bear's form. "But my father said teaching was for soft men. Said I needed to work the land, build calluses, be useful." "So you ran away," Sarah said quietly. Jacob nodded. "At 18. Came west. Figured I'd find something different out here. Ended up trapping because it was solitary, because nobody could tell me how to live." He glanced at Emma and Lucy, both listening intently. "Met your mama when I came down for supplies one winter. She was teaching at the school, and I saw her with the children one day. The way she made learning seem like magic. It was everything I'd wanted to be." "That's why you loved her," Emma said softly. "That's one reason," Jacob agreed. "There were about 100 others." Sarah felt the familiar ache of being outside this shared grief. But she also felt something else, gratitude that Jacob was trusting her with this story, letting her see beneath the gruff exterior. "Can you read, Papa?" Lucy asked suddenly. Jacob's face colored. "Some? Not well." Your mama was teaching me before—" He didn't finish, but they all knew. "Before she died, Sarah could teach you," Emma suggested, looking between them. "She reads really well. Better than Mama did, even." Jacob looked startled by the suggestion, and Sarah held her breath, not sure if Emma's comparison would anger him or hurt him. But instead he looked thoughtful. "Would you be willing," he asked Sarah, "to teach me proper? I can read simple things, but anything more complicated—" "Of course," Sarah said, feeling something warm expand in her chest. "I'd be happy to." And so they added another element to their evenings. After dinner, after the girls had their story time, Jacob would sit with Sarah at the table while she helped him work through simple texts. He was better than he'd claimed, could read most words. Just slowly, but she helped him with pronunciation and comprehension, watching with quiet joy as he grew more confident. One night, he read an entire page without stumbling, and when he finished, he looked at her with such genuine pride that Sarah felt her heart skip. "That was perfect," she said. "Felt good," Jacob admitted. "Like I'm finally learning something I should have learned years ago." "It's never too late to learn," Sarah said. "My mother always said that." Jacob studied her face in the firelight. "She sounds like she was a wise woman, your mother." "She was," Sarah said, touching the locket at her throat. "I wish you could have met her." "I think you would have liked each other." "I think so too," Jacob said quietly. The moment stretched between them, something unspoken shifting in the air. Then Lucy called out from her bed that she needed water, and the moment broke. But it had been there, real and tangible, a connection forming between them, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The next morning, Sarah woke to find a completed carving sitting on the small table in her room. The bear was magnificent, strong and solid, standing tall, its face somehow both fierce and gentle. She picked it up carefully, running her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the detail. Jacob had carved fur texture into the body, had given the bear's eyes a knowing expression. It was clearly made with great care. When she came out into the main room, Jacob was already up, starting the fire. He glanced at her, saw the bear in her hands, and looked away quickly as if embarrassed. "Thank you," Sarah said. "It's beautiful. I'll treasure it." "It's just wood," Jacob said gruffly, but she could see the pleasure in his face. "It's more than that," Sarah insisted. "It's art, and it means something that you made it for me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah felt something shift between them again. They weren't just two people trapped together by circumstance anymore. They were becoming partners, maybe even friends. The storm finally broke on the 7th day, revealing a world transformed by snow. The sun came out, brilliant and blinding, making the white landscape sparkle like it was covered in diamonds. Jacob needed to check his trap lines to make sure the animals were all right, but before he left, he did something unexpected. "Girls," he called, "bundle up. We're all going out." Emma and Lucy scrambled to get their warmest clothes on, excited after days of being cooped up inside. Sarah hesitated, not sure if she was included in all. Jacob noticed her standing there. "You two," he said. "Figure you could use some fresh air. Besides, there's something I want to show you." They trudged through the deep snow, Jacob breaking trail while Sarah and the girls followed in his footsteps. Lucy held Sarah's hand. This had become natural now, while Emma ranged ahead, trying to keep up with her father. The cold air bit at Sarah's cheeks, but it felt clean and alive after the closed-in feeling of the cabin. Jacob led them to a spot about a quarter-mile from the cabin, where the trees opened up to reveal a stunning view. Mountains stretched out in every direction, their peaks white against the brilliant blue sky. The valley below was a sea of snow-covered pines, smoke rising from a few distant cabins. "This is what I see when I'm out here," Jacob said, standing next to Sarah while the girls played in the snow nearby. "This is why I stayed. Despite everything, the isolation, the hardship, I stayed for this." Sarah understood. Standing there, breathing in the cold, clean air, seeing the raw beauty of the untamed land, she felt something settle in her soul. This place was harsh, yes. It was unforgiving, but it was also magnificent. There was a freedom here, a sense of possibility that she'd never felt in town with all its whispers and judgments. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "It can be lonely too," Jacob said, "especially in winter. Especially when—" He stopped, but Sarah knew what he meant. "Especially when you're alone. Especially when you're grieving." "You're not alone now," Sarah said quietly. Jacob turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw gratitude and something else, something warmer that made her heart beat faster. "No," he agreed. "I'm not." Emma's shriek of laughter broke the moment. She and Lucy were building a snowman, or trying to, with more enthusiasm than skill. Jacob went to help them, showing them how to pack the snow properly, and Sarah watched this man who'd seemed so hard and distant reveal his gentle side with his daughters. Later, as they walked back to the cabin, Lucy riding on Jacob's shoulders and Emma chattering excitedly about the snowman, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt since her mother died: contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the sense that she was where she was meant to be, with people who were learning to value her, in a place that could become home. That evening, as had become their custom, Sarah read aloud while everyone listened. Tonight it was a collection of adventure stories, tales of explorers and pioneers. Emma sat close to Sarah, Lucy was in her lap, and Jacob was in his chair, the whittling knife idle in his hands as he listened. When Sarah finished a particularly exciting chapter, she looked up to find everyone's eyes on her. Emma was smiling, Lucy was half asleep, and Jacob was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was warmth there now, real warmth, maybe even the beginnings of affection. "You have a gift for that," Jacob said, reading aloud. "You make the stories come alive." "My mother used to read to me the same way," Sarah said. "I always wanted to share that with someone." "Well," Jacob said, standing to stretch, "you're sharing it with us now, and we're grateful for it." He paused, then added more quietly, "I'm grateful for it, for you being here." It was the most he'd said about his feelings since she'd arrived, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to make the moment awkward, but she knew Jacob had seen them. After he'd carried a sleeping Lucy to bed and Emma had gone to her room, Jacob lingered in the main room. He stood by the fire, seeming to debate something with himself, then turned to Sarah. "I know this isn't what you chose," he said. "This life, this marriage. I know your father forced your hand, and I took advantage of a bad situation because I needed help." He paused, searching for words. "But I want you to know that I see how hard you're working. I see how good you are with the girls, how patient you've been with all of us. You've brought something back to this house that I thought was gone forever." "What's that?" Sarah asked softly. "Life," Jacob said simply. "Hope. The feeling that tomorrow might be better than today." He looked directly at her. "Thank you for that." Sarah didn't trust herself to speak. She simply nodded, and Jacob seemed to understand. He bid her good night and went to his room, leaving Sarah alone with the fire and her thoughts. She pulled out her journal and wrote about the day, the view from the mountain, the snowman, the evening of reading, Jacob's words. She wrote about how she'd come to this place expecting nothing but survival, but was finding something more. Not love, not yet, but respect, partnership, the foundation on which something real might be built. Outside, the mountain night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the darkness. Inside, 4 people slept under one roof, no longer strangers. Not quite family yet, but moving slowly, steadily towards something that felt like belonging. Sarah touched the carved bear sitting on her table, traced its strong form with her fingertips, and smiled. She was finding her strength here, in this unlikely place, with these unlikely people. And for the first time in a very long time, she was beginning to believe that she deserved to be happy. Winter had just begun, and there would be hard months ahead. But Sarah no longer feared them. She was ready to face whatever came, because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. January brought the deepest cold Sarah had ever experienced. The temperatures dropped so low that the water bucket inside the cabin would freeze overnight, that going outside, even for a few minutes, felt like knives against exposed skin. They were truly isolated now, cut off from the outside world by snow and cold. dependent entirely on each other for survival and company. It should have been unbearable, this forced closeness. Instead, Sarah found herself grateful for it. The cabin had become a sanctuary, a warm haven against the brutal winter, and the people inside it were becoming something more than strangers bound by obligation. Emma had almost completely dropped her hostility. She still had moments of grief, times when she'd cry for her mother or say something sharp about Sarah not being Anna, but mostly she was just a 7-year-old girl, sometimes helpful, sometimes contrary, always curious. She followed Sarah around the cabin, learning everything she could about cooking and sewing and managing a household. She was bright and quick to learn, with her mother's organizational mind and her father's determination. One morning, Sarah was struggling to reach a jar of preserves on a high shelf when Emma appeared at her elbow. The girl dragged over a stool without being asked, climbed up and retrieved the jar. "Mama was tall," Emma said, handing it down. "She never needed the stool. Papa put everything up high for her." There was no accusation in the statement, just observation. Sarah took the jar gratefully. "Well, I'm not tall, so I appreciate you being my helper." "I don't mind," Emma said. "You do the same for me, right?" "Of course," Sarah said, surprised by the question. Emma nodded, satisfied. "That's what family does. They help each other." The word family hung in the air between them. It was the first time Emma had used it to include Sarah, and Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She wanted to say something meaningful. But before she could find the words, Emma had already moved on, asking about what they were making for dinner. But that word stayed with Sarah all day, warming her from the inside. Family Lucy, meanwhile, had fully claimed Sarah as hers. The 4-year-old shadowed her constantly, always wanting to help with chores, even when her help made things take twice as long. She chatted endlessly, telling Sarah elaborate stories about her doll, about the animals Papa carved, about the dreams she had at night. Sarah listened to all of it with genuine interest, treasuring this little girl's trust. One afternoon, Lucy was helping Sarah sort through a trunk of fabric scraps when she held up a piece of blue cloth. "This was from Mama's dress," Lucy said matter-of-factly. "See? It has the flowers she liked." Sarah took the fabric gently. It was beautiful, a soft blue cotton printed with small white flowers. She could picture Anna wearing it, moving around this cabin, caring for her family. "It's lovely," Sarah said. "Your mama had good taste." "She was pretty," Lucy said. "Papa said she was the prettiest woman in all of Montana." "I'm sure she was," Sarah agreed, and found that she meant it without jealousy. Anna had been here first, had loved these people first. There was honor in acknowledging that, not threat. Lucy studied Sarah with her dark, serious eyes. "You're pretty too," she said finally. "Different than Mama, but pretty." Sarah's eyes stung with sudden tears. This child, so young, already understood that different didn't mean lesser, that there was room in her heart for more than one person. "Thank you, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "Can we make something from Mama's dress?" Lucy asked. "Something to remember her?" It was then that Sarah had an idea. She'd noticed an unfinished quilt in another trunk, clearly started by Anna but never completed. The pattern was beautiful, mountain stars in blues and golds, intricate and ambitious. Maybe 24 squares were finished, but there must have been 50 more needed to complete it. "Lucy, go get your sister," Sarah said. "I want to show you both something." When the girls were gathered around, Sarah brought out the unfinished quilt. Emma's face crumpled immediately. "Mama was making this," she said, touching the fabric with reverent fingers. "She worked on it every evening. She said it was going to be for all of us, to keep us warm when we were old." "I remember," Lucy said softly. "She let me pick some of the colors." Sarah took a breath. "What if we finished it?" she suggested gently. "Together. We could use some of your mama's old clothes for new squares, mix them with fresh fabric. It would be a way to honor her memory while making something new." Emma looked uncertain. "What if we mess it up? What if we do it wrong?" "We won't," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "I'll teach you everything I know about quilting. We'll take our time and do it right. Your mama would want her project finished, don't you think?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She would. She hated leaving things unfinished. She always said, her voice caught. She always said a job worth doing was worth doing well. Then we'll do it well, Sarah promised. For her, and so they began a new tradition. After the evening meal and story time, after Jacob had gone to his room or sat carving by the fire, Sarah and the girls would work on the quilt together. Sarah taught them the basics, how to cut squares precisely, how to piece them together with tiny, even stitches, how to choose colors that complemented each other. Emma was methodical and careful, just like her mother must have been. Lucy's stitches were larger and less precise, but she tried so hard that Sarah praised every attempt. They talked while they sewed, about Anna mostly. The girls shared memories, stories Sarah had never heard. The time Anna had tried to bake a cake and forgot the sugar. The way she'd sing while she worked. How she'd read to them every night without fail, doing all the voices, making them laugh even when they were scared of the dark. Sarah listened to these stories without jealousy, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, respecting the grief that still lived beneath the memories. And slowly, as they stitched together pieces of old and new fabric, something else was being stitched together too, a new kind of family, one that honored the past while making room for the future. Jacob watched these quilting sessions from his chair, and Sarah sometimes caught him staring at them with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not pain exactly, though there was some of that. More like wonder, like he couldn't quite believe this was his life now. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Jacob came to the table where Sarah was still working on a particularly tricky square. He sat down across from her, watching her hands move. "That's Anna's pattern," he said quietly. "I wondered what happened to that quilt. She was so excited about it. The girls wanted to finish it," Sarah explained. "I hope that's all right." "I know it was hers. It's more than all right," Jacob said. You're giving them a way to hold on to her while still moving forward. That's a gift, Sarah, a real gift." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I just want them to know their mother mattered." "That she'll always matter." "She will," Jacob agreed. He paused, then added, "But so will you. You matter too, Sarah, to all of us." Their eyes met across the table, and Sarah felt her heart skip. There was something in Jacob's gaze now that hadn't been there before. Something warm and appreciative, and maybe even tender. She wasn't sure what to do with it, this growing awareness between them. They were married, yes, but it had been a marriage of convenience. They'd never discussed what it might become beyond that. "I should finish this square," Sarah said, looking down at her work, suddenly shy. "Right," Jacob said, but he didn't move immediately. "Sarah?" She looked up. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "I know I don't say it enough, but I am. You've made this place, you've made us better." Before Sarah could respond, he'd stood and gone to his room, leaving her with her racing heart and tangled thoughts. She tried to focus on her sewing, but her mind kept drifting to Jacob's words, to the look in his eyes, to the way her body had responded to his nearness. This was becoming complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd come here expecting nothing, hoping only to survive. But now she was hoping for more, wanting more, and she had no idea if Jacob felt the same way, or if she was just a convenient solution to his practical problems. The quilt grew slowly through the cold weeks of January. Each square told a story. Pieces of Anna's old dresses mixed with fabric Sarah had brought from town, scraps from the girls' outgrown clothes, even a piece of Jacob's old shirt that had torn beyond repair. It was becoming a family history stitched in cloth, a record of loss and continuation, of grief and hope. Sarah found herself pouring all her complicated feelings into the quilting, her growing affection for the girls, her confusion about Jacob, her grief for her own mother, her hope that this strange new life might actually work. Each stitch was a prayer of sorts, a wish that they could all find peace here together. One afternoon, while the girls were napping and Sarah was working alone on the quilt, she made a discovery. Tucked into one of the completed squares was a folded piece of paper. Sarah carefully unfolded it and found a note in Anna's handwriting. "To whoever finishes this quilt, I pray it's my daughters, grown and skilled." I pray I'm there to see it completed. But if I'm not, if something has happened to me, please know that this quilt was made with love. Every stitch is a prayer for my family's happiness and safety. May whoever sits in this house, whoever cares for my precious girls, be blessed. May this home always be filled with love. Sarah read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Anna had known somehow that she might not survive, had known that someone else might sit in this cabin, care for her children, love her husband. And she'd offered her blessing. Sarah carefully tucked the note back into the quilt square, right where Anna had left it. It felt like a gift, like permission to be here, to care for these people, to maybe even love them without guilt. That evening, when they gathered for their quilting time, Sarah told the girls about the note. Emma cried, and Lucy didn't understand everything but cried, because her sister did. Jacob listened from his chair, his face working with emotion. She knew, he said finally. Those last weeks of her pregnancy, she knew something was wrong. She told me if anything happened. He stopped, couldn't continue. She wanted us to be happy, Emma said, wiping her eyes. She said that to me too. She said that whatever happened, Papa and Lucy and I should find a way to be happy again. Then that's what we'll do, Sarah said firmly. We'll finish this quilt and we'll be happy. All of us together. That's what she wanted. And that's what we're going to give her. They worked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The only sound, the crackling fire and the whisper of thread through fabric. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall. But inside the cabin, something was being mended, not just a quilt, but hearts that had been broken, lives that had been shattered, a family that was learning how to be whole again. As Sarah stitched, she thought about Anna's blessing, about the strange path that had brought her here, about the life she was building with these people who'd become so precious to her. She thought about her mother's locket hanging around her neck, and knew that her mother would be proud of how she'd faced this challenge. She wasn't the same girl who stood in that church 3 months ago, terrified and alone. She was stronger now, more confident. She'd found her place, her purpose. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to find something more, something that looked like love, growing slowly in the quiet spaces between words, in the warmth of shared work, in the gradual opening of hearts that had locked themselves away. February brought the first signs that winter might someday end. The days grew incrementally longer, and on clear mornings the sun had actual warmth in it. Not enough to melt the snow that still blanketed everything, but enough to offer hope that spring would eventually come. Sarah had been at the cabin for 4 months now, and it no longer felt strange to wake up here. The small room off the kitchen had become hers in a way that felt real. She'd arranged her few belongings just how she liked them. The carved bear Jacob had made sat proudly on her table, and she'd even hung a small mirror Mrs. Callahan had sent with her, though Sarah had almost left it behind, not wanting to look at herself. But now, looking in that mirror as she braided her hair one morning, Sarah saw something different. Her face wasn't any thinner. She'd always be a large woman, she knew that. But there was color in her cheeks now from the cold air and physical work. Her eyes looked brighter, less haunted. She looked healthy. More than that, she looked like someone who had a purpose. She was pinning up the last of her braid when Jacob knocked on her door frame. She turned, surprised. He never came to her room. "Morning," he said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to catch you before the girls woke up. There's something I need to give you." He held out a small leather-bound book, its cover worn smooth with use. Sarah took it carefully, turning it over in her hands. "What is this?" she asked. "A journal," Jacob said. "I went to town last week while you were all sleeping. Thought you might like something to write in. I know you keep notes on scraps of paper, but I figured—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Anyway, if you want it." Sarah opened the journal to find pages of fine cream-colored paper, completely blank and full of possibility. Her throat tightened with emotion. "Jacob, this is thank you. This must have cost—" "Don't worry about that," he said quickly. "You work hard here. You deserve something nice." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. This gift said, "I see you. I notice what you care about. I want you to have the things that matter to you. I'll treasure it, Sarah said softly. Thank you, Jacob nodded, still looking slightly uncomfortable with the emotional weight of the moment. Well, better get breakfast started. Girls will be up soon. He left, and Sarah sat on her bed holding the journal, feeling its weight in her hands. It wasn't just a gift, it was recognition. Jacob was acknowledging that she had thoughts worth recording, a life worth documenting, that she was more than just a housekeeper and childminder. She was a person with an inner life that mattered. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the table with her new journal and began to write. She wrote about the day, the small kindnesses, the ordinary moments that had somehow become extraordinary. She wrote about Emma teaching Lucy the alphabet, using flour on the table, about the way the light had come through the window at noon, turning the snow outside to diamonds. She wrote about Jacob's gift and what it meant to her, and she wrote about her feelings, the complicated tangle of them, how she'd come to care so deeply for the girls in such a short time, how they felt like her daughters now, not just children she watched, how the thought of anything happening to them made her chest tight with fear, how Emma's laugh could light up her whole day, how Lucy's sleepy cuddles in the morning made her feel needed and loved. She wrote about Jacob too, though those feelings were harder to name. He wasn't the stern, distant man she'd first married. Or maybe he was, but she saw past that now to the gentle heart underneath. She saw how he struggled to show affection, how he'd been raised to think emotions were weakness. But she also saw the moments when he forgot to guard himself, the way he smiled at his daughters, the pride in his eyes when he watched them learn something new, the careful way he'd carved that bear for her. She noticed other things too. How he'd started sitting closer during evening reading time. How he'd find excuses to stand near her in the kitchen, supposedly checking on something, but really just seeking her company. How his hand would sometimes brush hers when they both reached for the same thing, and how he'd no longer pull away immediately like it burned. Was this attraction? Affection? Something deeper? Sarah didn't know. She only knew that when Jacob was in the room, she was aware of exactly where he stood, that she'd started noticing things about him, the way his hair curled slightly at his neck, the rough timbre of his voice when he first woke up, the strength in his hands. That she thought about him when he was gone, worried about him on the trap lines, felt relieved when he returned home safely each evening. It was confusing and exciting and terrifying all at once, because this wasn't supposed to be part of their arrangement. She wasn't supposed to develop feelings for him, and she had no idea if he felt anything similar, or if she was just a convenient presence in his house, nothing more. The next few weeks brought a subtle shift in the household dynamics. It started small. Jacob began staying up after the girls went to bed, sitting at the table while Sarah worked on the quilt or wrote in her journal. Sometimes they'd talk about simple things. Plans for the garden when spring came, supplies they'd need from town, repairs the cabin required. Sometimes they'd fall into deeper conversations about their childhoods, their dreams, the lives they'd imagined for themselves before reality intervened. Sarah learned that Jacob had wanted not just to teach, but to write books for children, stories about the wilderness, about the animals he knew so well, about the lessons the natural world could teach. He'd even started one once years ago, but had abandoned it when his father called such pursuits foolish. "Do you still have it?" Sarah asked. "The story you started?" Jacob looked embarrassed. "Maybe somewhere. I'd like to read it," Sarah said. "If you'd let me." He'd looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable in his eyes. "Maybe someday," he'd said quietly. Sarah shared her own abandoned dreams, how she'd wanted to open her own bookshop, how she'd loved the idea of connecting people with stories that could change their lives, how she'd imagined creating a warm, welcoming space where readers could gather and share their love of books. "That would have been something," Jacob said. "Oh, you'd have been good at that." "Would have," Sarah agreed. "But this," she gestured around the cabin, "this is good too. Different than I planned, but good. Is it?" Jacob asked, and there was genuine uncertainty in his voice. "Is this really good for you, Sarah? Or are you just making the best of a bad situation?" Sarah considered the question seriously. 4 months ago, she would have said this was a prison. But now, it's good, she said honestly. Hard sometimes, lonely in different ways than I expected, but good. These girls, your girls, they've become so precious to me. And this place, as harsh as it can be, has a beauty I never expected to find. And me, Jacob asked quietly, am I part of what makes it good, or just part of what makes it hard? It was the most direct question he'd asked about their relationship, and Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She could deflect, could give an easy answer that kept them both safe behind their walls. Or she could be honest, could risk vulnerability in hopes of something more. You're part of what makes it good, she said, meeting his eyes. You've been kinder to me than you had any obligation to be. You've made me feel, she searched for the right word, seen, like I matter for more than just what I can do. That's a gift, Jacob. You may not realize it, but that's a real gift. Something shifted in Jacob's expression, surprise, pleasure, and something deeper that made Sarah's breath catch. He reached across the table and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. You do matter, he said. More than I probably should admit. You've become... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I didn't expect this. Any of this. I thought I was just getting help with the girls. Someone to keep the house. But you've become something more. Someone I look forward to seeing every day. Someone I miss when I'm gone. Someone who makes this place feel like home again. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Jacob, I know this wasn't what you chose, he continued, his hand tightening on hers. I know your father forced you into this, and I took advantage of that because I was desperate. But if you chose now, freely, would you stay? Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you wanted to. Because this life, difficult as it is, was something you actually wanted. It was the question Sarah hadn't let herself fully consider. If she could choose, what would she choose? Not the life she'd imagined as a girl, living in town, running a shop, maybe marrying someone gentle and bookish. But this life, this cabin, these children, this man. I would stay, she said, and knew it was true. This has become home, Jacob. Not the place I expected, but the place I want to be. With people I've come to... She hesitated, not quite ready to say love. With people who've become my family. Jacob's eyes were bright with emotion. He stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her up to stand with him. They were close now, closer than they'd ever been, and Sarah could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I want to kiss you, Jacob said quietly. But only if you want that too. Only if I'm not just your obligation. You're not my obligation, Sarah whispered. Not anymore. Maybe you never were. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Sarah didn't pull away. She leaned in too, meeting him halfway, and when their lips touched it was gentle and uncertain and absolutely right. The kiss was brief, nothing more than a soft press of mouths, but it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something real and chosen, not forced or obligatory, but genuinely wanted by both of them. When they pulled apart, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. I know this is complicated, he said. I know I'm not what you would have chosen if you'd had real choice. But I want to try, Sarah. I want to see if this could be more than just an arrangement. I want that too, Sarah said, and felt like she was finally admitting something she'd been feeling for weeks without acknowledging it. They stood there together for a long moment, holding each other, before Jacob finally stepped back. I should let you get some sleep, he said. But Sarah, thank you for being here, for giving us all a second chance at being a family. After he'd gone to his room, Sarah sat back down with her journal and tried to capture the moment in words. But some feelings were too big, too complex to fit on a page. All she could write was, tonight something changed. Tonight, I stopped being just his wife on paper and started becoming something more. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time since Mama died, I'm not afraid of it. The next morning brought an awkwardness that neither of them quite knew how to navigate. Jacob was quieter than usual at breakfast, and Sarah found herself fumbling tasks she normally did without thinking. Emma noticed, of course. The girl noticed everything. Why are you both acting so strange? She asked, looking between them with suspicious eyes. "We're not acting strange," Sarah said quickly. "Yes, you are," Emma insisted. "Papa keeps looking at you when you're not watching, and you keep dropping things." "Did you have a fight?" "No fight," Jacob said, his ears turning slightly red. "Everything's fine." Emma didn't look convinced, but Lucy created a distraction by spilling her milk, and the moment passed. But throughout the day, Sarah was acutely aware of Jacob's presence in a way she hadn't been before. Every glance felt weighted with meaning. Every accidental touch sent heat through her body. It was both wonderful and terrifying. That afternoon, Jacob came in from outside with a determined look on his face. "Sarah, could you come with me for a minute? I want to show you something." The girls were occupied with their dolls, so Sarah followed him outside and around to the back of the cabin. There, she found Jacob had been working on something she hadn't noticed before, clearing a space, building raised beds with lumber he must have been saving. "It's for the garden," Jacob explained. "I know you mentioned wanting to grow more vegetables this spring, so I thought I'd prepare the space. Make it easier for you." Sarah looked at the careful construction, at the hours of work he must have put in without saying anything, and felt her heart swell. "Jacob, this is wonderful. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply. "You do so much for us, for the girls. I wanted to do something for you." He paused, then added more quietly, "I want you to have reasons to stay. To want to stay." "I already want to stay," Sarah said, moving closer to him. "I told you that last night, I know, but—" Jacob looked down at his hands. "I'm not good with words like you are. I don't know how to say the things I feel, but I can build things. I can work. I can show you that way, maybe." Sarah reached out and took his hand, rough and calloused from labor, strong and capable. "You're better with words than you think," she said. "And this," she gestured at the garden beds, "this says everything I need to hear." They stood there in the cold spring air, hands clasped, and Sarah felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was becoming something neither of them had planned, but both of them wanted. The weeks that followed brought a deepening of their connection. Jacob started finding more reasons to stay close to the cabin, to work on projects near the house instead of disappearing into the forest all day. They began taking walks together in the late afternoon when the girls were occupied. Trudging through the melting snow, talking about everything and nothing, Jacob told her about his trap lines, about the animals he encountered, about the peace he found in the solitude of the forest. Sarah told him about the books she'd loved as a girl, about her mother's wisdom, about the dreams she'd once had and the new dreams that were forming. They talked about the girls too, Emma's quick mind and fierce heart, Lucy's gentle nature and creative spirit. They discussed how to help Emma with her reading, how to encourage Lucy's confidence. They were becoming partners in the truest sense, not just sharing a home, but sharing the work of building a family. One evening, as they sat by the fire after the girls had gone to bed, Jacob pulled out a folded sheaf of papers from his pocket. He held them for a moment, clearly nervous, then handed them to Sarah. "This is the story I started," he said. "The one I told you about. I found it in my things. I haven't looked at it in years, but after our talk I thought maybe you'd still want to read it." Sarah took the papers carefully, seeing how much it cost him to share this vulnerable piece of himself. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said. That night, alone in her room, Sarah read Jacob's story. It was about a young bear cub learning to survive in the wilderness, taught by his mother about the forest's rhythms, the danger and beauty of wild places. The writing was rough in places, clearly the work of someone still learning his craft. But it was also beautiful, vivid and heartfelt, full of genuine love for the natural world. The next morning, Sarah found Jacob alone in the kitchen before the girls woke. "I read your story," she said. He tensed, clearly bracing for criticism. "It's not very good, I know. I told you I wasn't—" "It's wonderful," Sarah interrupted. "Jacob, you have real talent. The way you described the forest, the animals, I could see it all so clearly." "Feel it." Jacob's face showed disbelief. "You're just being kind." "I'm being honest," Sarah insisted. "Yes, it needs work. The structure could be tighter. Some of the descriptions could be trimmed. But the heart of it, the core, that's special. That's something most writers spend years trying to find, and you have it naturally. You really think so? Jacob asked, and Sarah heard the hope in his voice, the part of him that had never stopped wanting this dream. I really do, she said, and I think you should finish it. Keep writing. You have something worth saying. Over the following weeks, something new was added to their evening routine. After the girls went to bed, after their own conversations, Jacob would pull out his papers and write while Sarah worked on the quilt or her journal. Sometimes he'd ask her opinion on a passage, and they'd discuss the best way to phrase something, the right word to capture a feeling. Sarah would offer suggestions gently, and Jacob would consider them seriously, not defensive, but genuinely interested in improving his craft, watching him bent over his work, his face focused and alive with creativity. Sarah felt something deep and warm bloom in her chest. This was love, she realized. Not the dramatic, overwhelming passion of storybooks, but something quieter and more solid. It was respect and admiration and genuine care. It was wanting his happiness as much as her own. It was seeing him fully, his strengths and flaws, his past and potential, and cherishing all of it. She didn't say the words yet. Neither of them did. But it was there between them, growing stronger every day, built on shared work and honest conversation, and the slow revelation of their true selves to each other. The quilt was nearly finished now. They'd pieced together the final squares, and Sarah was beginning the process of quilting it, stitching through the layers to hold everything together. Emma and Lucy helped when they could, their skills improving with each session. The quilt was beautiful, a testament to Anna's vision, but also to their collective work, their family's story stitched in fabric. One evening, as they all worked together on the final border, Emma looked up at Sarah with serious eyes. When this is done, where will we put it? Wherever you'd like, Sarah said. It's for all of us. Emma considered this. I think it should go on Papa's bed, she said. So he's warm. And so he can remember Mama every night, but also see all the work we did together. You and me and Lucy and him, all of us as a family. Sarah's throat tightened. That's a perfect place for it. Mama would like that you're here, Lucy said suddenly, her small face very serious. She would like that Papa smiles again, that we have someone to take care of us. How do you know that, Lucy? Emma asked gently. I just do, Lucy said with the certainty of a child. I feel it. Mama wants us to be happy. Sarah looked at Jacob and found him watching her with naked emotion in his eyes. She saw grief there still, but also gratitude, affection, and something that looked very much like love. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Sarah stood at her small window, looking out at the mountain night. The snow was melting fast now, revealing patches of brown earth. Spring was coming, bringing new life, new growth, new possibilities. She thought about the girl she'd been 4 months ago, frightened and ashamed, convinced she had no value, resigned to a life of mere survival. That girl seemed like a stranger now. Sarah had found strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd found purpose in caring for these children, satisfaction in managing a household, joy in the daily rhythms of mountain life, and she'd found love. Not the way she'd imagined it, not with the kind of man she'd once dreamed about, but real and solid and true. Love that had grown slowly, rooted in respect and partnership, flowering in the quiet moments of shared life. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd tell Jacob how she felt. She'd find the courage to say the words that had been building in her heart for weeks now. Life was too uncertain, too precious to waste time on fear. Her mother had taught her that. Anna's death had proven it. Tomorrow, she'd be brave. But tonight, she simply stood at her window, touching the locket at her throat, the carved bear on her table, and the journal Jacob had given her. She stood surrounded by symbols of love, past and present, lost and found and felt for the first time in years, truly at peace with who she was and where her life was taking her. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and somewhere in the forest, spring was stirring. Inside the cabin, 4 hearts beat in separate rooms, but they were no longer separate in the ways that mattered. They were becoming a family, chosen and cherished. bound together not by obligation, but by something far stronger, by love, growing quietly in the space between winter's end and spring's beginning. March brought a warm spell that turned the melting snow to rushing streams, and with the thaw came the possibility of travel to town. They needed supplies badly: flour, salt, sugar, fabric, seeds for the garden. Jacob announced they'd make the trip in 2 days. Once the main trail dried out enough to be passable, Sarah was both excited and anxious about returning to Pine Bend. She'd been gone 4 months, isolated on the mountain, living a life completely removed from her old existence. She wondered how the town would see her now, what they'd say about the girl who'd been sold to the mountain man. Would they pity her, mock her, or would they even remember her at all? The morning before the trip, Sarah was cleaning Jacob's room, a task she'd taken on recently, though Jacob had initially protested that she didn't need to do it. She was changing the bedding, putting on fresh sheets they'd laundered the day before. When she knocked over the cedar box on his dresser, the box tumbled to the floor, its contents spilling across the wooden planks. Sarah dropped to her knees immediately, gathering up the items: letters tied with ribbon, a few small trinkets, a pressed flower. She was trying to carefully replace everything when she saw the paper that had fallen half under the bed. It was an official document, the kind with elaborate printing along the borders. Sarah pulled it out, meaning only to put it back in the box, but her eyes caught on the words printed across the top: Certificate of Marriage. Her heart stuttered. Of course Jacob would have kept their marriage certificate. It made sense. But as she started to fold it back up, something caught her attention. The date was there, November 18th, 1882. The names were there, Jacob Thorne and Sarah Miller. The officiant signature was there, but the line for filing, the official county registration line, was blank. Unsigned, unfiled. Sarah stared at the document, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. The marriage certificate had never been filed, which meant legally they weren't married at all. Her hands started shaking. She sank back onto her heels, the paper trembling in her grip. Why? Why would Jacob not file the certificate? Why would he go through the ceremony, bring her to his home, let everyone believe they were married, but never make it legal? The answer came to her slowly, piece by terrible piece. He'd kept an escape route. He'd given himself or her a way out. If things didn't work, if she couldn't handle mountain life, if she wanted to leave, she could. She wouldn't be legally bound to him. The marriage could simply be dissolved, as if it had never happened. But why keep it secret? Why not tell her? Unless he'd always planned this to be temporary. Unless she was just a trial solution, a temporary helper, until he could find someone better. Someone he actually wanted to marry for real. Sarah's chest tightened with a pain so sharp she gasped. All these weeks of growing closer, all those conversations by the fire, that kiss, had any of it been real? Or had she been fooling herself, seeing love where there was only convenience? She thought about Emma's words weeks ago. Mama would want us to be happy. But maybe Emma didn't know the truth. Maybe none of them did. Maybe Sarah was the only one ignorant enough to think this was real. She heard footsteps in the main room, Jacob returning from the barn. Sarah's first instinct was to hide the certificate, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But anger rose up alongside the hurt. She had a right to know. She had a right to understand what her life actually was. She stood, still clutching the certificate, and walked into the main room. Jacob was removing his coat, not yet seeing her face. The girls were outside playing in the muddy snow, their laughter drifting through the partially open door. "Jacob," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need to talk to you." He turned, saw what she was holding, and his face went white. "Sarah, I can explain. Can you?" She held up the certificate. "Can you explain why our marriage was never filed? Why I've been living here for 4 months thinking I was your wife, when legally I'm nothing?" It's not like that, Jacob said, moving toward her, but Sarah stepped back. "Then what is it like? Why did you keep this a secret?" Jacob ran his hand through his hair, clearly struggling for words. "I didn't want to trap you," he said finally. "You didn't choose this marriage, Sarah. Your father forced your hand." "I forced your hand by making the offer. It didn't seem right to make it legally binding when you'd never really had a choice. So, you were going to what? Let me go eventually. Send me back? No, Jacob said quickly. I planned to file it. After some time had passed, after you decided if you wanted to stay, if you wanted this to be real. And when exactly were you planning to tell me? Sarah demanded. When were you going to let me know that everything I thought was my life was actually just temporary? Just some kind of trial period? I was going to tell you soon, Jacob said. I was waiting for the right moment. I wanted you to choose freely, Sarah. I wanted you to want to be here, not just be stuck here because of a piece of paper. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Do you know what's cruel about that, Jacob? I did choose. Weeks ago, I chose to stay, chose to care for your children, chose to... She stopped, couldn't finish, couldn't admit she'd chosen to love him, when clearly that had been a mistake. Chose to what? Jacob asked, his voice rough with emotion. It doesn't matter, Sarah said. The point is, I thought I was building a life here. I thought this was real. But I was just, what? An employee you could dismiss whenever you wanted. A convenient solution to your problems that you never committed to. That's not fair, Jacob said, hurt flashing across his face. You know that's not what you are to us. To me, do I? Sarah challenged. Because this certificate says otherwise. This says you never intended to really be married to me. You were just keeping your options open. Jacob looked stricken. I was trying to give you freedom. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing would have been honesty, Sarah said. The right thing would have been telling me the truth and letting me make my own decisions. But instead, you let me believe something that wasn't true. You let me... She stopped, her voice breaking. You let me fall in love with you, she finished silently. You let me think this was real. Sarah, please, Jacob said, reaching for her again. Let me explain properly. I know I handled this wrong, but your intentions don't matter if I can't trust you, Sarah said quietly. The anger was draining away, leaving only hurt behind. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? How am I supposed to know what's real and what's just convenience? She thrust the certificate at him and turned away, needing to be alone, needing to think. But Jacob caught her arm gently. Don't walk away, he said, please. We need to talk about this. I can't right now, Sarah said, pulling her arm free. I just need some time. She went to her room and closed the door, then sat on her narrow bed with her head in her hands. 4 months. 4 months of building a life, of believing she'd found a home, of letting herself hope for happiness. And all of it was based on a lie. Not a malicious lie, maybe, but a lie nonetheless. She heard Jacob outside her door, heard him start to knock, then stop. Heard his footsteps retreat. Good. She couldn't talk to him right now. Couldn't look at him without feeling the sharp ache of betrayal. The worst part was understanding on some level why he'd done it. He'd been trying to be kind, trying to give her a choice she'd never had. But in doing so, he'd taken away something more important, her ability to trust that this was real. That she was truly wanted here, not just convenient. Sarah pulled out her journal, the one Jacob had given her, and felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. He'd given her this journal, encouraged her writing, made her feel seen and valued. But all the while, he'd been keeping this secret. This fundamental fact about their relationship that she should have known from the beginning, she wrote furiously, pouring out her confusion and hurt onto the pages. She wrote about how foolish she felt, how exposed. She'd let her guard down, had let herself become vulnerable, had started to believe she could have love and belonging. And now she didn't know what any of it meant. Outside, she heard Emma and Lucy come in, heard their excited chatter stop abruptly, heard Emma's worried question, "Papa, what's wrong?" "Where's Sarah?" Heard Jacob's heavy response, "Sarah needs some time alone." "Come on. Let's get you two cleaned up for lunch." Sarah pressed her hands over her ears, not wanting to hear the concern in the girls' voices, not wanting to think about how this would affect them. She'd become so attached to Emma and Lucy, had started to think of them as her daughters. But were they? Or had she just been borrowing them, taking care of someone else's children, while the real arrangement remained undefined? Hours passed. Sarah heard the sounds of afternoon passing into evening. Jacob making dinner with the girls' help, the murmur of conversation at the table, the routine of bedtime preparations. No one knocked on her door. No one tried to make her come out. Finally, when full dark had fallen and the cabin had gone quiet, Sarah heard a soft knock. "Sarah?" It was Jacob's voice, quiet and tentative. "Can I come in?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Part of her wanted to tell him to go away, to leave her alone with her hurt. But another part knew they had to talk eventually. They lived in the same small cabin. They shared responsibility for 2 children. They couldn't just avoid each other forever. "Come in," she said finally. Jacob opened the door slowly, carrying a lamp. In its light, Sarah could see he looked exhausted, his face drawn with worry. He set the lamp on her table and sat on the only chair, keeping distance between them. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't tell you." "I should have been honest from the start." Sarah said nothing, waiting. Jacob continued, his words coming slowly, carefully. "When your father came to me with his debts, when we made the arrangement, I felt sick about it. I'd watched my own father control every aspect of my life, force me into a future I didn't choose. And here I was, doing the same thing to you, taking advantage of your desperate situation to get what I needed." He looked down at his hands. "I couldn't make it right. You still had to come here whether you wanted to or not. But I could give you one thing. I could give you the legal freedom to leave if you chose to. So I didn't file the certificate. I figured I'd wait 6 months, maybe a year, long enough for you to know if this was something you could live with. And then I'd ask you, really ask you, with the option to say no if you wanted to make it legal. Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. "Because I'm a coward," Jacob said bluntly. "Because I was afraid if you knew you could leave, you would. Because every day you stayed, even not knowing, felt like maybe you were choosing this. Choosing us." He met her eyes. "Choosing me." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I did choose you, Jacob, weeks ago. I chose all of this. But I thought I was choosing a real marriage, a real life. I thought we were building something together, and now I find out it was all, what? Conditional." "It wasn't conditional," Jacob said urgently. "Sarah, these past months, what's grown between us, that's been real. That kiss, those conversations, the way I feel when you're near, none of that has been conditional or temporary or anything but genuine." "Then prove it," Sarah said. "We're going to town tomorrow. File the certificate. Make this real. Show me that you want this to be permanent, that I'm not just convenient." Jacob stood, crossed the small distance between them, and knelt beside her bed. He took her hands in his, and Sarah let him, though she kept herself guarded. "I'll file it tomorrow," he said. "First thing, and Sarah, I want you to know something. I love you. I don't say it easily, don't give my heart lightly. But you've become essential to me, not because you take care of my house or my children, but because you're you. Because you're brave and kind and stronger than you know. Because you've brought light back into this cabin, back into my life. Because I can't imagine my days without you in them." It was the most he'd ever said about his feelings, the most vulnerability he'd ever shown. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words wash away the hurt. But the betrayal was still too fresh. "I need time," she said quietly. "I need to think about all of this." Jacob nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. He squeezed her hands once, then released them. "Take all the time you need. But Sarah, don't doubt that you're wanted here. Don't doubt that you matter. Whatever you decide about us, about this marriage, know that Emma and Lucy love you. And so do I." He left, closing the door gently behind him, and Sarah was alone with her thoughts once more. She lay down on her narrow bed, exhausted but too troubled to sleep. She thought about everything Jacob had said, about his intentions, his reasons for keeping the secret. She understood them, could even see the twisted nobility in what he'd been trying to do. But understanding didn't erase the hurt, didn't erase the fact that for 4 months she'd been living a lie. Yet was it a lie? The life she'd built here was real. The love she felt for Emma and Lucy was real. The work she did, the satisfaction she found in it, the sense of purpose, all real. The feelings that had grown between her and Jacob, those felt real too, no matter what the legal status of their marriage might be. Sarah touched her mother's locket, seeking comfort in the familiar weight of it. What would her mother say about this situation? Elizabeth had always believed in honesty, but she'd also believed in forgiveness, in second chances, in recognizing when someone's heart was in the right place, even if their actions were flawed. "Don't let anyone make you feel small," her mother had said. And Sarah realized that's what this was really about. The unsigned certificate had made her feel small again, worthless, like she wasn't important enough for Jacob to commit to fully. It had awakened all her old insecurities, all the shame her father had heaped on her about her size, her value, her place in the world. But that wasn't what Jacob had meant at all. He'd been trying to give her power, not take it away. He'd been trying to ensure she had a choice, even if his method had been misguided. The question now was, what did she want to do with that choice? She could leave. The marriage wasn't legal. She could go back to Pine Bend, ask Mrs. Callahan to take her in, figure out some kind of life for herself. She'd be free of obligation, free to make her own way. But the thought made her chest ache. Leave Emma, who'd finally opened her heart. Leave Lucy, who called her Mama Sarah and curled up in her lap every evening. Leave this cabin that had become home, this mountain that had taught her her own strength. Leave Jacob, who'd fumbled and made mistakes, but who was trying, who'd given her a gift he thought was kindness, even if it had hurt. No, Sarah realized with sudden clarity that leaving wasn't what she wanted. Not anymore. Maybe months ago, if she'd known the marriage wasn't real, she would have seized the chance to escape. But now she wanted to stay. Not because she was trapped, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was where she chose to be. The unsigned certificate wasn't a prison, it was freedom. Freedom to choose this life, these people, this love, with full knowledge and full agency. Jacob had been trying to give her that all along, even if he'd gone about it the wrong way. Sarah sat up, decision made. Tomorrow they'd go to town. Tomorrow, Jacob would file the certificate and make their marriage legal. And Sarah would sign it knowing exactly what she was choosing. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She opened her journal one last time before sleeping and wrote, "Today I learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other despite the mistakes, the misunderstandings, the ways we inevitably hurt each other. Jacob gave me a gift today, even though it didn't feel like one at first. He gave me the power to choose, and I choose this. I choose him. I choose us." The next morning, Sarah emerged from her room to find Jacob already up making coffee with nervous hands. Emma and Lucy were still sleeping. He looked up when she entered, hope and fear warring in his expression. "I'm going to town with you today," Sarah said without preamble. "And we're going to file that certificate together. Not because you're obligating me to, but because I'm choosing to. Do you understand the difference?" Jacob's face transformed with relief and joy. "I understand." "Good," Sarah said, moving to the stove to start breakfast. "And Jacob, next time you decide to do something noble and stupid, talk to me first. We're partners. That means we make decisions together." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real smile she'd seen from him since the revelation yesterday. "Partners," he agreed. "I like the sound of that." They worked side by side preparing breakfast, and when the girls woke up excited about the trip to town, everything felt almost normal again. Almost. There was still a fragile quality to things, a sense that they'd been close to breaking and hadn't quite settled back together yet. But they would. Sarah believed that now. They would work through this, would learn from it, would emerge stronger on the other side. The journey to Pine Bend took most of the morning. The trail was muddy and difficult, but the weather was fair and the sun warm on their backs. The girls chatted excitedly, Lucy riding with Sarah, Emma with Jacob. They talked about what supplies they'd buy, what treats they might get, whether Mrs. Callahan would be in town. As they descended from the mountain and Pine Bend came into view, Sarah felt her stomach tighten with nervousness. She'd left this town a frightened girl with no prospects. She was returning a woman who'd built a life, who'd found her strength, who knew her worth. She touched her mother's locket for courage, then squared her shoulders. Whatever happened in town today, whatever people said or thought, it didn't matter. She knew who she was now, and she knew where she belonged. Pine Bend looked exactly the same as when Sarah had left 4 months ago. The same wooden buildings lining the muddy main street, the same church steeple rising above the general store, the same handful of people moving about their business. But Sarah felt entirely different. She sat taller in the saddle, met people's curious stares with calm dignity instead of ducking her head in shame. Their first stop was the county office, a small building next to the courthouse. Jacob helped Sarah down from her horse while Emma and Lucy waited outside with excited impatience. They'd been promised a visit to the general store after the official business was completed. Inside, the clerk was a thin man with spectacles who looked up from his ledger with mild interest. "Help you folks. Need to file a marriage certificate," Jacob said, pulling the document from his pocket. He spread it on the counter, and Sarah stood close beside him, a united front. The clerk examined it, frowning slightly. "This is dated back in November. Why wasn't it filed then?" "My oversight," Jacob said evenly. "Want to make sure it's properly recorded now." The clerk shrugged. It wasn't unusual for mountain folk to be careless about paperwork. He copied the information into his ledger, stamped the certificate with an official seal, and filed it in a drawer. "That'll be 50 cents for the filing fee," Jacob paid, and the clerk handed him a receipt. "You're all legal now. Congratulations." It was anticlimactic after all the emotional turmoil of the previous day. But as they walked out into the sunshine, Sarah felt something settle in her chest. It was done, real, legal. She was Jacob Thorne's wife in every way that mattered. Jacob must have felt it too, because he took her hand right there on the street in full view of anyone who might be watching. It was a bold gesture for him, a public claim, and Sarah squeezed his hand in response. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for choosing this, for choosing us." "Thank you for giving me the choice," Sarah replied. Emma and Lucy ran up to them then, demanding to know if they could go to the store now, and the serious moment broke into laughter. They walked down the main street as a family, and Sarah noticed the looks they drew, surprise mostly, and some speculation. She'd been gone long enough that people had probably assumed the worst, that the mountain had broken her or that Jacob had proven to be cruel, but here she was, healthy and whole, holding her husband's hand while his daughters skipped ahead. And the sight seemed to confuse the gossips. At the general store, they encountered the first real test. Sarah's father was there. Thomas Miller stood near the counter, arguing with the store owner about credit. He looked worse than when Sarah had seen him last. Thinner, more haggard, with the red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands of a man deep in his cups even this early in the day. He turned when the bell above the door chimed, and his eyes widened when he saw Sarah. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. Then it hardened into defensiveness. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough. You look well." "I am well," Sarah said evenly. She felt Jacob tense beside her, protective, but she squeezed his hand reassuringly. She could handle this. Thomas's eyes moved to the girls, to Jacob, back to Sarah. "So he's treating you right then? Not working you too hard up there?" The 3 days before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Jacob barely left the cabin except to check the most essential trap lines. He spent hours with Sarah at the table, going over their testimony, anticipating questions, rehearsing responses. Emma and Lucy knew something was wrong, could feel the tension in the air, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. On the second night, Emma climbed into Sarah's lap during story time and whispered, "They're not really going to take you away, are they?" Sarah held the girl close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm going to fight as hard as I can to stay. Promise you won't leave us," Lucy said, crawling over from where she'd been sitting with Jacob. "Promise." Mama Sarah? The name Mama Sarah broke something in Sarah's chest. These girls who'd once hated her now loved her, needed her. The thought of being torn from them was agony. "I promise I'll do everything I can," Sarah said, not wanting to lie, but also not wanting to make promises she might not be able to keep. "I love you both so much, more than I ever thought possible." That night, after the girls were asleep, Jacob came to Sarah's room, the first time he'd ever entered uninvited. She was sitting on her bed, writing in her journal, and looked up in surprise when he appeared in the doorway. "I needed to see you," he said simply. "To say if tomorrow doesn't go our way, if they rule against us, I want you to know something." "Jacob, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I need to say this while I can. You've changed everything for us, Sarah. You've brought this family back to life. You've made me remember what it feels like to hope, to look forward to tomorrow. Whatever happens, that's a gift I can never repay." Sarah stood, moved to where he was standing. "It's not a debt to be repaid. It's love, Jacob. That's all it ever was." He pulled something from his pocket, a ring. Sarah recognized it immediately from the cedar box. "Anna's wedding ring. I know this isn't what you'd choose," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you'd probably want your own ring, something that's just yours. But I want you to have this. Not to replace Anna. You never could, never should. But to join her. To be part of this family's history." He took Sarah's hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Anna would have liked you," Jacob continued. "She would have seen your strength, your kindness. She would have been grateful that you care for her daughters the way you do. I think she'd be happy knowing they have you." Sarah looked down at the ring through tears. It was simple gold, worn smooth with years of wear, warm from Jacob's pocket. It felt right on her finger, felt like it belonged there. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me with this, with all of it." Jacob cupped her face in his hands, rough palms gentle against her skin. "I love you, Sarah. Whatever tomorrow brings, I need you to know that. I love you truly, completely, not because you're convenient or because you take care of my children, but because you're you. Because you're brave and beautiful and everything I didn't know I needed. I love you too," Sarah said and kissed him. It was different from their first kiss, deeper, more urgent, born of the fear that they might not have many more chances. They clung to each other in the doorway of her small room, trying to memorize the feeling, the taste, the warmth of being together. When they finally pulled apart, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be hard, but we'll face it together." After he left, Sarah lay in bed, twisting the ring on her finger, feeling its weight, its history, its promise. She thought about Anna, the woman who'd lived here before her, who'd loved these people first. She thought about how she'd been so afraid of Anna's ghost, of not measuring up to a memory. But now she understood. There was room for both of them in this family's heart. Anna's love hadn't diminished. It had simply made space for Sarah's to grow alongside it. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. They left early, Mrs. Callahan having agreed to watch the girls. Emma clung to Sarah at the cabin door, tears streaming down her face. "Come back," Emma whispered fiercely. "You have to come back." "I'm going to try with everything I have," Sarah promised. The ride to town felt like riding to battle. Jacob was grim and silent beside her, but their hands were linked between their horses, a lifeline neither wanted to release. Sarah wore her best dress, the one her mother had worn, carefully let out and mended. And on her finger, Anna's ring caught the morning light. The courthouse was already filling when they arrived. News of the hearing had spread, and it seemed half the county had turned out to witness the spectacle. Sarah saw curious faces, pitying faces, judgmental faces. She held her head high and walked into the building with Jacob at her side. Inside, she got her first look at their opponents. Rancher Bradford was a big man, with an expensive suit, and the bearing of someone used to getting his way. His son Wesley stood beside him, and Sarah's stomach turned. Wesley was probably 10 years older than her, with cruel eyes and a smirk that made her skin crawl. He looked at her like she was livestock he was evaluating for purchase, and there was her father, standing awkwardly to the side. Looking small and ashamed, but not ashamed enough to leave, the judge entered, Judge Harrison. a weathered man in his 60s, known for being fair but strict about the law. Everyone rose as he took his seat, then settled back down at his gesture. "This is an unusual case," Judge Harrison began, looking over his papers. "Mr. Bradford, you filed a complaint regarding the marriage of Jacob Thorne and Sarah Miller." "State your case." Bradford's lawyer stood, a slick man from the territorial capital. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. In November of last year, Thomas Miller entered into a debt agreement with Jacob Thorne. The terms specify that in exchange for Mr. Thorne paying Mr. Miller's debts, Miss Sarah Miller would marry Mr. Thorne. A ceremony was performed, but the marriage certificate was never filed with the county. The lawyer paused for effect. "Therefore, we argue that the terms of the agreement were never properly fulfilled. The marriage was not legal, which means the debt arrangement was incomplete. Mr. Miller's debts remain unpaid in the eyes of the law. My client, Mr. Bradford, is prepared to fulfill the original agreement, paying Mr. Miller's debts in exchange for Miss Miller's hand in marriage to his son." "Wesley Bradford," murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Harrison held up a hand for silence. "That's quite an interpretation of contract law. Mr. Thorne, I understand you have representation?" Jacob stood, but before he could speak, Sarah stood as well. "Your Honor, may I speak for myself?" Judge Harrison looked surprised but nodded. "This case directly concerns you, Miss Miller, or Mrs. Thorne, depending on how I rule." "You may speak." Sarah took a breath, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. This was it. This was her chance to fight for her life, her family, her future. "Your Honor, I want to be absolutely clear about something," Sarah began, her voice stronger than she felt. "I am not property. I'm not livestock to be traded between men who think they own me. I am a person with rights and agency and the ability to make my own choices." Bradford's lawyer started to object, but Judge Harrison waved him silent. "Let her speak." "The arrangement my father made with Jacob Thorne was wrong," Sarah continued. "It treated me like a commodity, something to be sold to settle debts. My mother, before she died, wrote me letters explicitly telling me I was not to be used this way, that I had the right to choose my own path." She pulled out her mother's letters and handed them to the court clerk to give to the judge. "These letters show my mother's wishes, that I never be treated as property for my father's convenience." Judge Harrison took the letters, scanned them briefly, his expression thoughtful. "These are moving, Mrs. Thorne, but they're not legally binding. Her parents' wishes, however well-intentioned, don't supersede contract law." Sarah felt her heart sink, but pressed on. "Then let me address the contract, Your Honor. Yes, the marriage certificate wasn't filed immediately, but that was deliberate. Jacob Thorne didn't file it because he wanted to give me a choice. He knew I'd been forced into the arrangement by my father's debts. He wanted me to have the freedom to leave if I chose to. He was trying to give me agency in a situation where I'd had none." "That's a convenient excuse," Bradford's lawyer interjected. "More likely, Mr. Thorne simply failed to complete the legal requirements of the arrangement, which invalidates the contract." "We filed the certificate 3 days ago," Jacob said firmly. "It's legal and binding now." "But not when the arrangement was made," the lawyer countered. "The contract specified marriage in exchange for debt payment. If the marriage wasn't legal at the time of the arrangement, the contract wasn't fulfilled." "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice rising with passion, "I lived on that mountain for 4 months, thinking I was married. I built a life there. I care for Jacob's daughters as if they were my own. I've created a home, a family, and I did it all while having the legal freedom to leave at any time. The unsigned certificate wasn't a loophole, it was a gift of choice." Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with sharp eyes. "Mrs. Thorne, let me ask you directly. If I rule that your marriage to Mr. Thorne wasn't valid, if I rule that you must fulfill the arrangement with Mr. Bradford instead, what would you do?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I would refuse, Your Honor. I would refuse to be treated as property. I'm 18 now. She'd had her birthday a month ago, quietly on the mountain. I'm of legal age to make my own decisions. And I choose to stay with Jacob Thorne and his daughters. That's my family. That's where I belong. Not because a contract says so, but because I choose it. Judge Harrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That's a bold statement, Mrs. Thorne, but the law isn't always about what we choose. It's about what's legal, what's binding. Then let's talk about what's legal, Sarah said, finding her courage. Bradford's lawyer says my father's debts remain unpaid because the marriage wasn't legal. But Jacob did pay those debts, every penny. I have witnesses who can confirm it. Mrs. Callahan stood in the gallery. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Harrison nodded. Come forward, Mrs. Callahan. The elderly woman made her way to the front, her back straight despite her years. Your Honor, I've known Sarah since she was born. I was Elizabeth Miller's closest friend, and I can tell you that after Elizabeth died, Thomas Miller became a disgrace. He drank away his business, borrowed from everyone in town, and when he couldn't pay, he sold his own daughter. Thomas Miller stood up, face red. That's not— Sit down, Mr. Miller, Judge Harrison said sharply. Mrs. Callahan, continue. Jacob Thorne paid every debt Thomas owed, Mrs. Callahan said firmly. Not just to him, but to the bank, the suppliers, everyone. He fulfilled his part of the arrangement completely. The only question is whether the marriage was valid. But Sarah just told you she's been living as his wife for 4 months. She's cared for his home and his children. If that's not a marriage in every way that matters, I don't know what is. Thank you, Mrs. Callahan, Judge Harrison said. He turned to Bradford's lawyer. Do you dispute that Mr. Thorne paid the debts as agreed? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We don't dispute the payment was made. We dispute whether the terms were fulfilled. The contract specified marriage, not cohabitation. A ceremony was performed, Jacob said, standing again. A preacher officiated. Sarah and I spoke vows before God and witnesses. The only thing missing was a county filing, which has now been completed. Surely that's a technical error, not a fundamental failure of the contract. Technical errors matter in contract law, Bradford's lawyer argued. If Mr. Thorne had wanted the marriage to be legal, he should have filed the certificate immediately. His failure to do so invalidates the arrangement. Wesley Bradford spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an ugly edge. Besides, Your Honor, it's clear Mr. Thorne got what he wanted, a free housekeeper and nanny for 4 months without any legal obligation. He used the girl, plain and simple. My father's offer is fair compensation for that abuse. Sarah felt Jacob tense beside her, felt the rage building in him. She grabbed his hand tightly, knowing that any violence now would only hurt their case. But she couldn't stay silent at Wesley's accusations. I was not used, Sarah said coldly, turning to face Wesley. I was respected. I was valued. Jacob Thorne treated me with more dignity in 4 months than my own father did in 16 years. And you— She looked at Wesley with open disgust. You see me as property, just like my father did. You think you can buy me because you have money, but I am not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. Your Honor, Bradford's lawyer said quickly. The girl's obviously been influenced by her time with Mr. Thorne. She doesn't understand the legal realities of her situation. I understand perfectly, Sarah shot back. I understand that you want to treat me like livestock. I understand that you think women are commodities to be traded. I understand that you don't care what I want or what's best for me, only what's convenient for you. Judge Harrison held up his hand. That's enough. Everyone calm down. He looked at Thomas Miller, who'd been sitting silently through all of this, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Miller, you've been remarkably quiet. What do you have to say about all this? This is your daughter we're discussing. Thomas stood slowly, his hands shaking. For a moment, he looked like he might defend himself, might argue for Bradford's offer and the money it would bring. Then his eyes met Sarah's, and something in him seemed to break. She's right, Thomas said quietly. Sarah's right about all of it. I sold my daughter to pay my debts. I treated her like she was worthless, like she was a burden. After her mother died, I couldn't look at Sarah without seeing all my failures. She reminded me of everything I'd lost. Everything I'd ruined with my drinking. He turned to Sarah, tears in his eyes. You deserved better than I gave you, Sarah. Your mother would be ashamed of me. I'm ashamed of me. When Bradford came with his offer, I thought about taking it. I thought about selling you again, and God help me, that makes me a monster. The courtroom was completely silent now. Thomas wiped his eyes with a shaking hand. "But I can't do it," he continued. "I won't do it. Whatever you rule, Your Honor, I want it on record that I withdraw any claim to my daughter. She's 18, she's made her choice, and I have no right to interfere. Bradford can have my debts. He can have the store. He can have everything I own. But he can't have Sarah. She's not mine to give." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. It wasn't redemption. Thomas had hurt her too deeply for one moment of decency to erase years of neglect and cruelty. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was letting her go. Bradford surged to his feet, furious. "This is outrageous. We had an agreement, Miller. You took my money." "I'll give it back," Thomas said wearily. "However I can. I'll work it off. But the deal is done. My daughter is not part of any agreement." Judge Harrison watched this exchange with an inscrutable expression. Then he turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Thorne, I want to ask you something very carefully. If your father had not just withdrawn his claim, if he had supported Mr. Bradford's position, would you have gone with them? Or would you have refused?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "I would have refused, Your Honor. I would have done whatever it took to stay with my family. I would have fought. I would have run. I would have made myself such trouble that they'd regret ever trying to claim me. Because I'm not property. I'm a person who has made her choice." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Judge Harrison's mouth. "I believe you would have." He looked at Bradford and Wesley. "Mr. Bradford, your case rests on the premise that Miss Miller is an asset to be transferred through contract law. But she's just demonstrated very clearly that she's not a passive participant in this arrangement. She's a woman of legal age who has stated her preferences explicitly." "Your Honor," Bradford's lawyer protested, "contract law doesn't care about preferences." "Perhaps not," Judge Harrison interrupted, "but marriage law does. And that's really what we're discussing here, isn't it? Not property transfer, but marriage. And I'll tell you something, Counselor. I've been a judge for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of marriages, good and bad. I've seen couples who had every legal formality in place, but no actual union. And I've seen couples who built real partnerships without all the paperwork." He picked up the marriage certificate, now properly filed and stamped. "Mr. Thorne filed this certificate 3 days ago. That makes the marriage legal as of that date. But Mrs. Thorne has testified that she's been living as his wife for 4 months, keeping his home, raising his children, building a life with him. That's a marriage in substance, even if the paperwork was delayed, Your Honor. The contract," Bradford's lawyer tried again, "the contract was for a marriage in exchange for debt payment," Judge Harrison said firmly. "Both of those things occurred. Yes, there was a delay in filing, but the marriage ceremony was performed in good faith by a licensed officiant, and the couple has been living as husband and wife since that time. The debt was paid in full. The terms of the original arrangement have been met." He looked directly at Bradford. "Mr. Bradford, I understand you saw an opportunity in the filing delay, but what you're really asking me to do is dissolve a valid marriage and force a woman to marry your son against her will. I will not do that. No amount of legal maneuvering changes the fundamental reality. Mrs. Thorne is a married woman who has clearly stated her desire to remain with her husband." "This is an outrage," Bradford shouted. "I paid good money." "You paid money to Thomas Miller based on a speculative legal argument that I'm now rejecting," Judge Harrison said coldly. "That's a matter between you and Mr. Miller. It has nothing to do with Mrs. Thorne's marriage." He brought his gavel down with a sharp crack. "I rule that the marriage between Jacob Thorne and Sarah Thorne is valid and legally binding. The terms of the original debt arrangement between Mr. Miller and Mr. Thorne have been fulfilled. Mr. Bradford's claim is dismissed." The courtroom erupted. Bradford was shouting about appeals. His lawyer was trying to calm him. Wesley was glaring at Sarah with pure hatred. But Sarah barely heard any of it. She turned to Jacob and found him staring at her with wonder and relief and love so naked it took her breath away. "We won," she whispered. "You won," Jacob corrected, pulling her into his arms right there in the courtroom, not caring who saw. You fought for us, Sarah. You stood up and claimed your life. I've never been more proud of anyone." Mrs. Callahan was crying, hugging them both. Other townspeople were congratulating them. Though just as many were leaving with disappointed expressions, they'd come for a scandal, and instead witnessed something else entirely. Thomas approached slowly, uncertain of his welcome. Sarah looked at him, this man who'd hurt her so badly, who'd finally done one decent thing. She wasn't ready to forgive, might never be. But she could acknowledge his moment of honesty. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for speaking up, for letting me go." Thomas nodded, tears still on his weathered face. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But Sarah, your mother would be proud of you, of the woman you've become. I just wanted you to know that." Sarah didn't respond, just watched as her father walked away, shoulders slumped with the weight of his failures. She felt Jacob's hand on her back, steady and supportive, and turned away from her past toward her future. Bradford and Wesley were leaving. Bradford still cursing, Wesley shooting one last look at Sarah that promised this wasn't over in his mind. But legally it was. The judge had ruled. Sarah was free. They stayed in town just long enough to complete a few more pieces of business. Jacob met with Thomas to sign papers officially ending any financial obligation between them. Sarah retrieved a few more of her mother's belongings from Mrs. Callahan, things the old woman had saved from Thomas's creditors. And then, as the sun was beginning to set, they rode back up the mountain together. The ride felt different this time, lighter, freer. Sarah kept looking at the ring on her finger, Anna's ring now officially hers, symbol of a marriage that was real and legal and chosen. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked as they climbed the familiar trail. "That I'm happy," Sarah said, surprised by the simple truth of it. "That I'm going home. That I get to keep my family." Jacob reached over and took her hand, their horses walking so close together their legs nearly touched. "Our family," he corrected gently. "Yours and mine and the girls. All of us together." When they reached the cabin, Emma and Lucy came running out, Mrs. Callahan following behind. The girls crashed into Sarah, nearly knocking her over, both talking at once, demanding to know what happened, if she was staying, if they were safe. "I'm staying," Sarah said, kneeling to hold them both. "I'm your mama now, really and truly. The judge said so. Nobody can take me away." Lucy burst into tears of relief, burying her face in Sarah's neck. Emma tried to be brave, but her chin was trembling. "Promise?" she whispered. "Promise you'll never leave?" "I promise," Sarah said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "This is my home. You're my family. I'm never leaving you." That night, after Mrs. Callahan had returned to town, after the girls had finally been convinced to go to bed, after the excitement had settled into quiet contentment, Jacob and Sarah sat together by the fire. The completed quilt was draped over the back of Jacob's chair. They'd finished it 2 days before the hearing, and it was beautiful, a testament to love and loss and continuation. "I need to tell you something," Jacob said quietly. "When I watched you in that courtroom today, when I heard you speak up for yourself, for us, I realized something. I thought I was saving you by bringing you here. I thought I was giving you a home when you had nothing. But it was the other way around." Sarah started to protest, but Jacob shook his head. "Let me finish. You saved us, Sarah, me and the girls. We were drowning in grief, just going through the motions of living. You came here and you brought us back to life. You taught us how to be a family again, how to love again. And today you fought for that with everything you had. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." Sarah took his hand, laced their fingers together. "We saved each other," she said. "That's what love does. It saves and heals and makes us brave enough to fight for what matters." Jacob pulled her close, and they sat together watching the fire, the quilt wrapped around them both. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something real and lasting from the ashes of loss and pain. Outside, spring was firmly taking hold now. The snow was gone, replaced by new growth. Wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the meadow. Birds were returning, filling the forest with song. The mountain was coming back to life, and so was the family who lived there. Sarah rested her head on Jacob's shoulder. feeling the steady beat of his heart, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who'd been sold to settle debts, who'd been told she was worthless, who'd believed she had no value. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who'd claimed her life, who'd fought for her family and won. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The garden would need planting. The cabin would need repairs after the harsh winter. The girls would need teaching and caring for. Life on the mountain was never easy, but it was theirs, chosen and fought for and deeply, genuinely wanted. And that, Sarah thought as she drifted towards sleep in Jacob's arms, was worth more than all the gold in the mountains. 3 months had passed since the hearing, and the mountain was in full bloom. The garden Sarah had planted was thriving, rows of vegetables growing strong in the raised beds Jacob had built, herbs flourishing near the kitchen door, even a few flowers that Sarah had added just for beauty's sake. The cabin looked different too, softer somehow. Sarah had made curtains for the windows, had added small touches that made it feel like a home instead of just a shelter. But the biggest change wasn't in the physical space. It was in the people who lived there. Emma had fully bloomed into herself, her natural brightness no longer dimmed by grief and resistance. She helped Sarah with everything now, from cooking to gardening to caring for Lucy. She'd started writing her own stories, inspired by her father's work, and would read them aloud in the evenings, with pride and a little shyness. Sarah treasured these moments, seeing this intelligent, creative girl become who she was meant to be. Lucy had grown too, though she was still only 4. She followed Sarah everywhere like a small shadow, chattering constantly, helping in her own enthusiastic, if sometimes disastrous way. She no longer clutched her torn rag doll quite so tightly. Sarah had made her a new doll as a birthday present, but Lucy kept the old one too, explaining that the old doll was from Mama Anna and the new doll was from Mama Sarah. And she needed both because she had 2 mamas who loved her. Even if one was in heaven, the wisdom of children, Sarah thought, could shame adults who insisted love had to be divided rather than multiplied. Jacob had changed most of all. The grim, silent man who'd brought Sarah to the cabin was gone, replaced by someone who smiled easily, who laughed at his daughter's antics, who would pull Sarah close just because he wanted to hold her. He'd finished his children's story about the bear cub and had started a second one. He talked about maybe trying to get them published someday, though he was still shy about sharing them with anyone but Sarah and the girls. And Sarah had found herself in ways she never imagined possible. She was strong now, not despite her size, but because of the work her body could do. She could split wood, haul water, work in the garden for hours without tiring. She could manage a household, raise children, navigate the complexities of mountain life. More than that, she'd found her voice. The frightened girl who'd barely spoken above a whisper was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who spoke her mind, who would fight fiercely for the people she loved. On a warm June afternoon, Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. She tensed instinctively. Visits were rare this far up the mountain, and unexpected visitors could mean trouble. But when she looked up, she saw Mrs. Callahan riding carefully up the trail, a younger woman beside her. "Mrs. Callahan," Sarah called, surprised and delighted. The old woman hadn't made the journey up the mountain since before the hearing. "What brings you all the way up here?" Mrs. Callahan dismounted with a groan, her joints clearly protesting the long ride. "Had to see how you were settling in, didn't I? Plus I brought someone who wanted to meet you." The younger woman dismounted too. She was perhaps 25, with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "I'm Margaret," she said, extending her hand to Sarah. "Margaret Bradford." Sarah froze. Bradford. The name of the man who'd tried to claim her, to force her into marriage with his son. "I don't understand," she said carefully. Margaret saw her expression and quickly added, "I'm Randall Bradford's daughter, Wesley's sister, and I came to apologize for my father and brother's behavior." "You don't need to apologize for them," Sarah said, though she was curious now. "I do, though," Margaret insisted. "What they tried to do to you was horrible. When I heard about the hearing, about how they tried to force you into marriage with Wesley, she shuddered. I was so ashamed. My mother was too. We've left my father. We're living in the territorial capital now. Sarah gestured to the chairs Jacob had made for the porch. Please sit. I'll make tea. Over tea and the cookies Emma had helped Sarah bake that morning, Margaret told her story. She'd been trying to leave her father's household for years, but hadn't had the means. Her mother had been trapped by lack of resources and social pressure. But after the hearing, after seeing how Sarah had stood up for herself, they'd found their courage. You showed us it was possible, Margaret said. To say no, to choose your own life, even when powerful men tried to control you. My mother sold some jewelry my grandmother had left her, and we took a train east. I'm working as a clerk now, and Mama takes in sewing. It's not easy, but it's ours. We're free. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She'd never imagined her fight for her own freedom might inspire someone else's. What about your father? And Wesley? Father's fury mostly, Margaret said. Wesley's the same as he ever was, cruel and entitled. But they have no power over us anymore. She reached across and took Sarah's hand. I wanted to thank you. And to tell you that what you did mattered. Not just for you, but for other women who saw your courage and found their own. After Margaret and Mrs. Callahan left, Mrs. Callahan, promising to visit again when the weather was good, Sarah sat on the porch thinking about courage and freedom and the ripples one act of bravery could create. She hadn't fought just for herself in that courtroom. She'd fought for every woman who'd been treated as property, who'd been told her choices didn't matter, who'd been expected to accept whatever life men decided to give her. That evening, with the family gathered around the table for dinner, Sarah looked at each of them and felt overwhelming gratitude. Emma carefully serving stew she'd helped make, so proud of her growing skills. Lucy chattering about the butterfly she'd seen in the garden, still young enough that wonder came easily. Jacob watching them all with quiet contentment, his hand finding Sarah's under the table and squeezing gently. This was her family. Chosen, fought for, fiercely loved. After dinner, they gathered around the fire as they always did. Tonight, Jacob was reading from his completed story. The tale of the bear cub, learning to survive, to thrive, to find his strength. The girls listened with rapt attention, though they'd heard it before. They never tired of their father's stories. When he finished, Emma said thoughtfully, "The bear cub is like you, Mama Sarah." Sarah looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "He's big and strong, but at first he doesn't know it," Emma explained. "He thinks she searched for the word. Just there. But then he learns all the things he can do. He finds his strength. That's like you. You came here not knowing how strong you were, and then you found it." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That's a beautiful way to think about it, Emma." "It's true, though," Lucy piped up. "You're the strongest, Mama. You can do everything." "Not everything," Sarah said with a laugh. "But I can do what matters. I can take care of the people I love." Later, after the girls were in bed, Sarah and Jacob worked together on the final touches of a new quilt, this one for Emma's bed. A project the girl had designed herself with stars and mountains and bears. They sat close together, their hands moving in practiced coordination, comfortable in their shared silence. "Margaret Bradford's visit today," Jacob said eventually. "Well, what she said about you, inspiring her, that's powerful, Sarah. You changed her life without even knowing it." "I was just fighting for my own life," Sarah said. "I didn't think about anyone else. That's what makes it powerful," Jacob replied. "You weren't trying to be a symbol or make a statement. You were just being yourself, standing up for what you knew was right. That's the kind of courage that changes the world." Sarah thought about that. About how one act of defiance could create ripples, could give other women permission to claim their own lives. It was humbling and empowering all at once. "I got a letter from town today," Jacob said, changing the subject. "From a publisher in San Francisco. They want to print my story." Sarah's hands stilled on the quilt. "Jacob, that's wonderful. Why didn't you say something?" He looked embarrassed but pleased. "Didn't seem real until now. But they're offering actual money, Sarah. Not much, but enough to matter. Enough to maybe buy some things for the house, some books for the girls, maybe even save a bit for their future. Sarah threw her arms around him, the quilt forgotten. "I'm so proud of you. You did it. You followed your dream." "We did it," Jacob corrected, holding her close. "You encouraged me, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Just like you've done for the girls. Just like you've done for all of us." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire crackling softly behind them. Outside, the mountain night was peaceful, full of the sounds of summer, crickets chirping, an owl calling, the wind moving through the pines. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "Choosing this life? It's not easy up here. Winters are harsh, we're isolated, it's hard work every day." Sarah pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life, this family, it's everything I didn't know I needed. Yes, it's hard. Yes, there are days I'm exhausted and cold and wondering if I can keep going. But those days are nothing compared to the joy of watching Emma discover her creativity, or Lucy learn something new, or seeing you smile at something one of them said. Nothing compared to the feeling of accomplishing real work with my own hands, of knowing I'm valuable and valued." She kissed him softly. "I was dying in that town, Jacob, slowly suffocating under the weight of other people's judgments and my own shame. You didn't save me from that, I saved myself. But you gave me the space to do it. You gave me a purpose and a family and a place to belong. So no, I don't regret it. I'd choose this 1,000 times over." Jacob's eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you, Sarah Thorne, more than I thought I could love anyone after Anna. You've given me back my life, given my daughters their joy, given us all a future I'd stopped believing in." "We gave it to each other," Sarah said, "and it was true. This wasn't a fairy tale where one person saved another. This was real life, where broken people had found each other and built something whole from their individual pieces." That night, Sarah wrote in her journal, the leather-bound book Jacob had given her now, nearly full of months of observations and reflections. She wrote about Margaret's visit, about Jacob's publishing success, about the small, perfect moments that made up their days. And she wrote about gratitude, for second chances, for chosen family, for the courage to claim her own life. She pulled out her mother's locket, opened it to look at the tiny photograph inside. Elizabeth's face smiled up at her, forever young, forever loving. "I did it, Mama," Sarah whispered to the image. "I found my strength. I found my worth. I found a family who values me for who I am, not despite it, but because of it. You'd be proud, I think. I hope you would be." She felt, rather than heard, her mother's approval. Elizabeth had always wanted Sarah to be happy, to be loved, to know her own value. Now she did. Now she had everything her mother had wished for her. Sarah closed the locket and looked around her small room. No longer a storage space, but truly hers, filled with her things, her books, her journal. Outside this room was a cabin full of people she loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new joys. The garden would need tending, meals would need cooking, children would need raising, a marriage would need nurturing. But Sarah was ready for all of it. She'd been tested and proven. She'd fought for her place in this family and won it through courage and persistence and love. This was her life now, chosen and claimed and cherished. She extinguished her lamp and lay down to sleep, the mountain night peaceful around her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jacob's quiet breathing in his room, the soft sounds of the girls sleeping in theirs. Her family, her home. Sometimes, Sarah thought as she drifted towards sleep, the hardest moments in life really do become the doorways to our greatest blessings. She'd walked through a doorway she never wanted, into a life she never chose, and found on the other side everything she'd ever needed. Found herself, found her strength, found her family, found her home, and that in the end was the greatest blessing of all.